You've been told to fix yourself, to become someone better, to heal, grow, evolve, until one day maybe peace will finally come. But what if that's the lie? What if peace isn't something you earn, but something you remember? What if you were never broken to begin with? They told you to keep improving, to keep striving, to chase happiness like a finish line. But if that worked, why does your heart still race at night? Why does your mind keep spinning, even in silence? Why does it feel like no matter how far you come, it's never enough? The truth is, peace isn't in perfection. It's in surrender. It's in letting go of who you think you have to be. And Buddhism holds the quiet key, the ancient teachings that whisper, "You're already home." For centuries, monks, sages, and seekers have used these truths to calm the mind, soften the heart, and return to the self beneath the noise. No fixing, no chasing, just stillness, clarity, compassion. And tonight, that peace begins for you. As you listen to these teachings, something inside will soften. The tension will loosen its grip. Your breath will deepen. Your thoughts will slow. You'll feel a stillness. Not because life is perfect, but because you've stopped resisting it. This isn't just another sleep audio. This is a homecoming. Are you ready to come home to yourself? Let's begin. And now, something shifts. After years of rushing, pushing, performing, you're finally here. Not just in a room, not just lying down, but here, inside yourself. There's a silence you may have forgotten, a place not outside the noise, but beneath it, a space untouched by opinions, untouched by timelines, untouched by shame. And that's where we're going now. Not forward, not back, inward. This is where peace has been waiting. There is a room inside you that does not move when the world shakes. A room that doesn't close when others leave. A room that never demands, never judges, never raises its voice. That room is stillness, and the doorway is passaddhi. Passaddhi is not a word we often hear, but it holds one of the greatest treasures in Buddhist wisdom, inner tranquility. Not the shallow calm of bubble baths and noise-cancelling headphones, but the kind of calm that stays with you even when life breaks your heart. The kind that doesn't fight the storm, but sits beneath it like the ocean beneath the waves. This inner room is not built with effort. It's uncovered through quiet. It doesn't need to be created. It's remembered, because it's always been there. Even when the mind was screaming, even when shame painted the walls of your thoughts, even when life felt like too much and your own mind became a maze, that still room never left. You just stopped visiting. Passaddhi is the gentle return, the practice of remembering how to sit inside yourself without fear, how to rest in your own presence, how to take a breath and not chase it with thought, to be here, fully here, and not feel like something is missing. Most people live outside themselves. Their attention is always somewhere else, scrolling, comparing, regretting, rehearsing. They're not present in their own bodies, let alone their own minds. They live in timelines and headlines and memories. But peace doesn't live there. Peace lives in presence. And passaddhi is how you find the way back. In Buddhist texts, passaddhi is described not as a goal, but as a natural state that arises when agitation is released, like how a pond becomes clear when you stop stirring the mud. The water was never broken. It was just busy. The same is true for your mind. It's not broken. It's busy. Too many thoughts, too much noise, too much past, too much future. And not enough now. So how do you stop stirring? You don't fight the thoughts. You don't force silence. You don't try to escape. You pause, you breathe, and you watch. When you watch the breath without trying to change it, the breath changes you. You begin to feel it soften. The tight places inside begin to release. You start to notice the sounds, not as enemies to silence, but as part of it. A passing car, a creaking floor, the soft hum of life. Nothing to control, nothing to push away. In this room, you don't have to be impressive. You don't have to explain yourself. You don't have to justify your pain. Here, your job isn't to succeed or perform, it's to simply be. That's the rarest thing in the world, to just exist, fully, without judgment. This is the freedom that Passaddhi offers, not an escape from life, but an embrace of it. You might think, but how can I rest when I have so many problems? And here's the truth. Most of your problems don't exist in the present moment. They live in the past you can't fix or the future you can't control. But right here, right now, this breath, this body, this space, it's okay. Maybe not perfect, but okay. And okay is a doorway to peace. The Buddha didn't promise a life without pain. He promised a path that brings peace within pain, and that path leads through the still room inside you. This isn't about meditating on a mountain for 10 years. It's not about being a perfect monk. It's about taking one moment, right now, to come back to yourself, to notice the breath, to feel your weight on the bed or chair, to let your shoulders drop, to let your jaw unclench, to give yourself permission not to solve everything. Passaddhi grows when we stop believing every thought, when we stop answering every inner criticism like it's a question that needs solving, when we learn that not everything needs a response. Some thoughts are just clouds. They pass if you stop chasing them. Some emotions are just weather. They change when you stop naming them as your identity. In this room, there are no roles, no identities, no expectations. You are not the parent, the child, the worker, the success, the failure. You are just a presence, a quiet witness, noticing. This is why monks smile with nothing, why hermits live with little but radiate contentment. They've made a home in this room. They don't need life to entertain them. They don't need the world to praise them, because they've found the one place the world can't touch. Stillness isn't boring, it's brave. It takes courage to sit with yourself without distraction, to feel everything, to face everything. But that's where the transformation happens. Because when you stop avoiding the silence, you start hearing your truth. You'll notice that most people aren't afraid of noise. They're afraid of what they'll feel in its absence. But feelings don't hurt you. Resistance does. The more you run, the more they chase. But when you sit down and say, "I see you," they lose their power. The fear softens. The anger dissolves. The loneliness becomes tenderness. And you realize the storm was never against you. It was asking for your attention. Passaddhi isn't a technique. It's a relationship. A deep friendship with stillness. It takes time to trust it, especially if you've spent your life racing, escaping, proving. But the more time you spend in that quiet room, the more it welcomes you. and eventually it becomes your refuge. Not just during meditation, but in traffic, in arguments, in grief, in confusion. You learn how to carry stillness with you like a hidden lamp, quiet, steady, always on. And the best part? No one can take it from you. Not circumstances, not failure, not rejection, because it lives inside you. You built it. You return to it. It is yours. Every tradition has a version of this room. In Christianity, it's the peace that surpasses understanding. In Taoism, it's the still center of the turning wheel. In Buddhism, it's passaddhi, the tranquility that doesn't depend on anything outside of you. And science is catching up. Neuroscientists have found that regular stillness, mindful breathing, body scanning, observing without reacting, rewires the brain. It reduces stress hormones. It increases emotional regulation. It enhances sleep, clarity, and even compassion. Stillness, it turns out, is not passive. It's medicine. But here's the thing. You can't force it. You can only allow it. Peace doesn't come from clenching. It comes from release. So release the need to be somewhere else. Release the pressure to become someone else. Release the guilt that says rest is lazy. Release the stories that say peace is for other people. You are allowed to be here. You are allowed to breathe. You are allowed to rest in the room where nothing needs to be fixed. This isn't about escaping life. It's about stepping so deeply into the present that nothing can shake you. It's about learning that real safety isn't out there, it's in here. And every time you come back to this room, you strengthen the path to it. Every breath, every pause, every moment of silent attention builds the doorway wider. One day, it won't even feel like returning. It will feel like living. So rest here, in the stillness beneath effort. Let it hold you. Let it teach you. Let it change you. Because the world will always call you to rush. But peace waits in the room that never rushes back. Let the breath guide you home. Let passaddhi settle your bones, and let the silence become your sanctuary. This is where your real life begins, not in the noise, but in the quiet room inside. Let's stay here a little longer, just breathing, just being, just home. But even inside the quiet room, there's something else. A presence that whispers just loud enough to be heard. A face that won't stop appearing. A version of the self that follows like a shadow. It doesn't scream. It criticizes. It doesn't shout. It judges. And while the room is silent, this inner voice keeps the war alive. A war with the mirror. A war with the idea of who you think you're supposed to be. That's where we go next. There's a quiet violence that lives in self-image. It looks harmless, just a glance, just a thought, just a feeling about the reflection in glass or the idea in the mind. But it carves deeper than most words spoken out loud. And the most painful part? It's internal. No one else sees it. No one else hears it. But it never stops. That ongoing argument between who you are and who you think you should be. And it's exhausting, because even when everything seems fine on the outside, career, family, health, there's still a pressure behind the eyes, a tension in the jaw, a discomfort that never quite leaves. As if life keeps asking you to be someone more, someone different, someone better. But what if that pressure isn't coming from life at all? What if it's coming from a belief that was never yours to begin with? What if the whole idea of the self that you're judging isn't even real in the way you've been told? This is where Buddhism does something radical. It introduces the concept of anatta, non-self. And it doesn't do it as a metaphor, it means it. At the core of Buddhist understanding is this truth. There is no fixed, permanent, solid you. Not the body, not the name, not the personality, not even the story. Everything you believe you are is constantly changing. Yet most suffering comes from forgetting that, from treating a fluid experience like it's a frozen identity. You look in the mirror and see a snapshot. You see skin, wrinkles, fat, scars, beauty, age, success, failure. But what you're actually looking at is a moment, not a truth, not a verdict, just a flicker of change caught in a single frame. And then you judge that flicker as if it defines you forever. This is the trap. The self-image becomes a courtroom. Every moment, a new trial. Every flaw, a new charge. And no matter how many compliments you get or how much progress you make, there's still a jury in your head waiting to find you guilty again. Anatta doesn't say you're nothing. It says you're not one thing. It says the self is not a fixed object. It's a process. A flame, not a sculpture. A river, not a statue. And once that's understood deeply, not just intellectually, but experientially, the war with the mirror begins to dissolve. Because you can't fight what doesn't stand still. You can't hate a self that keeps changing. You can't hold on to judgment when the target keeps slipping away. And here's the strange freedom in that. Once you stop clinging to an identity, the criticism starts to lose weight. There's nothing to defend, nothing to fix, nothing to prove. The person you thought you needed to be dissolves into presence. And presence doesn't compare. Presence doesn't judge. Most people are terrified to let go of identity because they think it's what makes them real. But what makes you real is your awareness, not your name, your status, your past, your plans. Your aliveness isn't in your resume. It's in your breath, in your heartbeat, in your capacity to observe this very moment. And that means you are more than the story you tell yourself. You are more than the mistakes you regret. You are more than the approval you seek, and more than the image you try so hard to maintain. So what happens when you stop arguing with the mirror? You stop performing. You stop rehearsing your answers. You stop adjusting your tone to fit someone else's expectation. You become quiet enough to hear your own truth underneath the noise. There is a Buddhist practice called contemplation on the 5 aggregates. It breaks down what we normally call the self into 5 parts: form, sensation, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. And when we examine each part, we realize none of them on their own can be called a self. They rise and fall, moment to moment, like waves in the sea. The body changes, the thoughts shift, the moods rise and fall. Even the sense of me comes and goes, depending on attention. So, what are we really holding on to? What are we really judging when we say we hate ourselves? We're clinging to clouds and then getting upset that we can't shape them into something solid. When you begin to let go of self-judgment, it doesn't mean you stop caring about your growth. It means you stop measuring your worth by an illusion. You grow not because you are broken, but because change is natural. You evolve not to become someone else, but to live more freely as no one in particular. And yes, that can be disorienting at first. If you've spent your life building an identity, tearing it down sounds scary. But what you find beneath that structure is not a void. It's space, openness, peace. The self is a useful tool, but a terrible master. It can help navigate the world, but it was never meant to define your essence. The Buddha didn't ask us to erase our names or personalities. He asked us not to cling to them, to see them like clothes, worn, used, appreciated, but never mistaken for who we are. So next time you look in the mirror, soften your gaze. Don't search for flaws to correct. Don't look for signs of success or failure. Just see what's there, without narrative, without measurement. Just this face, just this presence, just this moment. Because underneath all your versions is the quiet awareness that's never changed. The one that saw your first heartbreak and didn't run. The one that stayed through every mistake. The one that's still here now, watching, listening, breathing. That awareness isn't judging you, it's holding you, and it knows you don't need to be anything more. So let the mirror be just a mirror. Let the thoughts be just thoughts. Let the stories fall away. And let yourself be, without needing to explain why. Because peace doesn't come from fixing the reflection. It comes from realizing you're not the image at all. You're the stillness behind it. And once you stop arguing with the mirror, once the noise of who you think you are starts to quiet, what's left isn't silence. It's memory, not just images, but echoes. Echoes of choices, echoes of words you regret, echoes of moments you wish you could rewrite. And even if you've softened toward your reflection, there's still a voice that whispers, "But what about what you did?" That's the next layer, the one that doesn't attack your face, but your past. And the only way to move through it is with something far stronger than shame. It's time to talk about compassion, not in theory, not as a sweet idea, but as a force. Karuna, the kind that doesn't just feel sorry, it transforms. The kind that doesn't pity the past, it frees it. Guilt is sticky. It wraps around decisions and doesn't let them go. Even after growth, even after change, even after years. There's a part of the mind that clings to old versions of the self, like they're still standing in the room. And even though that version doesn't exist anymore, it keeps replaying like a loop, a mistake, a word, a look, a moment where you didn't know better. And now that you do, you punish yourself for the time you didn't. But this is where the Buddhist teaching of Karuna enters. Compassion, not just as kindness toward others, but as healing toward yourself. Compassion that says, you didn't fail, you learned. That doesn't excuse harm, but holds it in the light of human frailty. That remembers no one wakes up trying to hurt themselves or others. That people do what they can from the place they're in, and sometimes the place they were in was confusion, pain, or survival. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. Forgiveness is telling the truth without building a cage around it. It's seeing clearly that the person who made that choice was trying to cope, trying to feel safe, trying to belong, trying to matter. Maybe they failed. Maybe they caused pain, but they weren't evil. They were lost. And now you can choose to stop punishing the ghost of who you used to be. Karuna sees the full picture. It sees the wounded child underneath the reaction, the abandoned teenager underneath the anger, the stressed-out adult underneath the avoidance. It sees the deeper layers that most people ignore, and it replaces blame with understanding. Not so you can deny what happened, but so you can release the chain tied to it. In Buddhist practice, compassion isn't passive, it's powerful. It says, "I see your suffering, and I won't turn away." And when you turn that gaze inward, something incredible happens. You begin to see not just what you did, but what you were missing. You see the emotional hunger, the confusion, the fear, and you realize you weren't evil, you were unconscious. And consciousness now gives you the power to stop repeating the punishment. The mind loves to re-sentence itself. It loves to say, "You should have known better." But knowing better only comes from not knowing first. Growth is a process. You don't shame a flower for being a seed. You don't yell at a toddler for not knowing how to run. Yet somehow, we expect ourselves to have mastered life before we've even lived it. Karuna interrupts that cycle. It says, "The moment you realized you were wrong was the moment you became new." It doesn't ask you to justify your past. It asks you to hold it, to meet it with warmth instead of a whip, to touch it like a wound, not a weapon. And if part of you resists, if part of you says, "But I don't deserve forgiveness," that's where the deepest work is. Because what you're really saying is, "I don't believe I'm allowed to be free." And that belief is not humility. It's a hidden form of self-hate. True humility says, "I was wrong, and I'm learning." False humility says, "I was wrong, and I should suffer forever." But Buddhism doesn't teach eternal guilt. It teaches presence, and presence cannot carry guilt from the past and still remain whole. So, how do you practice karuna with your past self? You start by noticing when guilt arises. Instead of arguing with it, sit beside it. Ask it what it needs. Not what it wants, but what it truly needs. Often, it doesn't need punishment. It needs permission to feel pain, to grieve the consequences, to mourn the people you hurt, to cry for the version of you that didn't have the tools or the love or the clarity. And once that grief is seen, it starts to loosen. Another practice is speaking directly to the younger version of yourself, not to scold them, but to say what they never heard. You didn't know. You were scared. You were trying. You did your best. Not excuses, acknowledgements. Because part of why the wound stays open is because no one ever held it with care. You get to do that now. And it doesn't mean you don't apologize. It means your apology doesn't have to come from self-hatred. It comes from awareness. You take responsibility not because you are a bad person, but because you now see more clearly. That clarity isn't a punishment, it's a gift. It's a way of saying, "I won't let who I was define who I continue to be." There's a reason the Buddha didn't demand perfection from his disciples. He invited honesty. He knew people were learning, shedding, evolving. He didn't ask them to never fall. He taught them how to rise differently. So maybe that's your work now, not to erase your past, but to rise from it with gentleness. To stop confusing shame with maturity. Shame freezes. Compassion flows. Shame isolates. Compassion reconnects. Shame says, "You are the worst thing you've done." Compassion says, "You are so much more than that." Shame ties you to a version of yourself that no longer exists. Compassion unbinds the cord. And it's not just about emotional peace. Self-compassion has been shown in psychological studies to reduce anxiety, increase motivation, improve health outcomes, and deepen relationships. People who forgive themselves don't become lazy. They become freer to act wisely, because their decisions aren't based on avoiding guilt. They're based on clarity. You become less reactive, less defensive, more present, more capable of admitting when you're wrong now, because being wrong doesn't destroy you anymore. You've already survived it. You've already made peace with it. And if you still feel resistance, that's okay. Compassion isn't a switch. It's a practice. Some days you'll soften easily. Some days you'll struggle. But even in the struggle, you're planting seeds. Seeds of mercy, seeds of awareness, seeds of future peace. Sometimes it helps to write a letter. One part from the version of you now to the version of you then, and then one part from them to you now. Let the words come. Let the grief surface. Let the healing begin. And when you feel the guilt rise again, remember this. Every single person on the path of growth has made mistakes. It's not the absence of error that makes someone wise. It's the willingness to meet error with honesty and compassion. Karuna isn't soft in the weak sense. It's soft like water, able to cut through stone. It doesn't excuse behavior. It transforms it, and it transforms the one who carries it too. So yes, you hurt people. You disappointed yourself. You betrayed your own values, and now you see it. That seeing is the turning point. That seeing is the doorway. That seeing is the beginning of real peace. Because there's no peace without forgiveness. And there's no real forgiveness without self-compassion. Not just for who you are now, but for who you were when you didn't know better. Let that version of you go. Let them rest. Thank them for surviving. Thank them for doing what they could. And then carry forward with love. Not because you've earned it, but because you finally understand that love was never about earning. It was about seeing. And once you forgive the version of yourself that didn't know better, you begin to notice something deeper. The past isn't the only thing that left marks. Life itself has left cracks in your thoughts, in your body, in your habits, in your story. And maybe for the first time, you're not trying to cover them. You're just noticing. And that noticing brings you to the next truth, that the parts of you that feel broken might be the very places where the light enters. There's an old Zen story about a cracked bowl. The story is simple, but it holds a truth that shifts everything. A monk carried a bowl that had a small crack down one side. For years, he thought about replacing it. It leaked slightly when filled with water. It didn't match the other monk's perfect bowls. But one day, he noticed something strange. When he left the bowl by the window, the morning light passed through the crack in a way that made the entire surface shimmer, a small fracture revealing a hidden brilliance. From that day forward, the monk stopped trying to replace it. He treated the crack not as a flaw, but as part of the story, a doorway for light, a proof of life. This parable reveals something Buddhism has always known. There is no peace without embracing imperfection. The concept of anicca, impermanence, is not just about letting go of what ends. It's about recognizing that everything changes, everything shifts, everything breaks, and that's not a problem. That's the pattern. Flaws are not deviations from life. They are the evidence of life. They are where growth happened. They are where suffering cracked something open. They are the shape that pain leaves behind when it moves through you. But instead of seeing those marks as sacred, most people see them as shame. They try to hide the crack, cover the scar, smooth the story, present a version of themselves untouched by weather, untouched by time, untouched by reality. But perfection is the enemy of peace, because peace is only real when it includes the whole picture. Not just the polished surface, but the scratched, chipped, dented, and softened core underneath. The part that wasn't protected, the part that wasn't spared, the part that still shows up anyway. We spend so much of life trying to patch ourselves, trying to sand down our rough edges, trying to match some invisible standard of what it means to be worthy. And in the process, we miss the truth that the most powerful people we know, the ones who move us, comfort us, inspire us, are not perfect. They're real. They've bled, they've cracked, they've fallen and stood back up. In Buddhist teaching, there is a reverence for the raw, for what's weathered, for what's incomplete. Not as a problem to fix, but as a place to rest. This is not an aesthetic choice. It's a spiritual one. Because when you embrace imperfection, you embrace reality. You stop demanding that the world match your expectations, and in that surrender, peace becomes possible. Anicca teaches that everything is always becoming something else, and that includes you. You are not meant to stay flawless. You are meant to change. You are meant to age, to bruise, to outgrow versions of yourself, to let go of dreams that no longer fit, to accept that things fall apart not because you failed, but because they were meant to evolve. This understanding changes how you relate to your flaws. You stop seeing them as stains. You start seeing them as maps. Each mark points to a moment, a lesson, a love lost, a mistake made, a risk taken, a period of healing, a season of survival. Without those moments, you wouldn't be here. Without those moments, you wouldn't be you. When you walk into a temple in many Buddhist cultures, you'll often find statues that are chipped, worn, faded. No one polishes them to look new, because the wear is part of their power. They carry the energy of time, of devotion, of endurance. They teach without words. This is what remains when everything else fades. You are that too. You carry the story of time, not just the shiny moments, but the days that stretched forever, the nights that broke you, the mornings you didn't think you'd rise from. You carry those quietly, and maybe no one notices, but the light does. The light always finds the opening. The cracked bowl isn't beautiful because it hides the crack. It's beautiful because it lets the crack be seen, because it doesn't apologize for the fracture, because it turns that fracture into a prism. This is the invitation, to stop fixing and start witnessing, to notice where your wounds became wisdom, to honor the parts of you that kept going even when they weren't okay. Peace comes when you stop trying to get over things and instead bow to them, not in defeat, but in reverence. This hurt me, and I am still here. That is sacred. That is strength. That is the beauty no one can sell you or give you. It only comes from being fully alive. And in this awareness, comparison fades. Because when you see your own cracks as gold, you stop envying the polished surface of others. You stop chasing their version of beauty. You start trusting your own texture, your own tempo, your own timeline. This isn't about glorifying pain. It's about refusing to pretend you didn't feel it, about choosing not to edit your humanity, about letting yourself be soft where you used to harden, about seeing your own chipped edges as art. In Japanese culture, there's a practice called kintsugi, repairing broken pottery with gold. The break becomes the most precious part. That's not just a metaphor, it's a spiritual truth. What's broken and lovingly healed becomes more valuable than what never broke at all. This is what happens when you stop hiding, when you stop trying to earn peace by being flawless, when you let the cracks be seen. The gold appears, not from outside, but from within. Anicca reminds you that nothing stays, not the pain, not the judgment, not the fear, not even the self. Everything changes. That means you are free. Free to stop clutching perfection. Free to start appreciating process. Free to stop holding your breath and start living with it. Because once you accept that nothing is permanent, you stop wasting energy trying to hold things in place. You let people go. You let expectations fade. You let mistakes rest. You let peace rise, not because everything is clean, but because everything is real. The cracked bowl becomes not just a symbol, but a practice, a reminder to carry your life the same way, with care, with openness, with the understanding that it's okay to hold something that leaks a little. It's okay to love something that's been dropped. It's okay to keep something sacred, even when it no longer fits someone else's idea of whole. And maybe you start treating others the same way, with gentleness for their rough edges, with reverence for their history, with love that doesn't ask them to be smooth in order to be worthy. When you live this way, the world softens. Judgment thins. Compassion deepens. Presence expands. And your energy returns. Not to fixing, but to living. Let go of the illusion of flawless. Hold the truth of transformation. The bowl cracked because it was used, because it served, because it lived. So did you. You don't need to be repaired. You need to be recognized. Let the light come through. Let it reach every corner. Let it show you that the place you once hid is where peace has been waiting all along. So you've stopped hiding the cracks. You've stopped running from the flaw, the fracture, the softness that makes you human. But now another illusion shows up, a quieter one. It doesn't shame you. It seduces you. It speaks the language of healing. It promises peace. If only you could finally put yourself back together. It sounds helpful, wise even, but underneath, it's just another chase, another belief that who you are is still not enough, that your soul is a puzzle missing its final piece, that you must integrate, fix, combine, align, until the inner chaos finally goes quiet. But what if that's just another trap? Because the idea of self-integration, the popular Western pursuit of becoming whole, can quickly turn into a pressure to perfect the inner world. A soft tyranny that says, you're not allowed to rest until you've figured yourself out. It puts your identity on a shelf, then demands you rearrange it until it looks symmetrical. And every time something new arises, a habit, an emotion, a contradiction, You think, I have to make sense of this now too. This is where Buddhism offers a completely different direction. It doesn't say, collect yourself. It says, release yourself. Not because you're broken, but because you're not an object. You're not a collection of traits to be catalogued. You're not a story to be completed. You're not even a consistent character. You're a field of awareness, a process, an unfolding, and the need to constantly define and organize yourself is the very thing keeping you from peace. The more you chase wholeness, the more fragmented you feel. Because true inner calm doesn't come from assembling the self like a Lego set. It comes from letting go of the idea that there ever was or should be a perfect configuration of who you are. The more you try to become someone coherent, the more exhausted you get when life asks you to be flexible, fluid, or simply present. In Buddhist psychology, there's no fixed self to organize. There are just aggregates, experiences, tendencies, consciousness passing through conditions. The desire to pull those into a singular, polished image isn't healing. It's clinging. It's just a quieter version of ego building. You think you're integrating, but you're still identifying. You're still constructing a version of me that feels safe. And safety, in this case, is based on consistency, not truth. But the truth isn't consistent. The truth is wild. You are compassionate and reactive, wise and forgetful, peaceful 1 hour, overwhelmed the next. One moment you're grounded, the next you're tangled in thoughts. That's not a failure of integration. That's the nature of a living being. The idea that you need to resolve every contradiction before you can rest is a form of spiritual pressure disguised as self-work. When you stop collecting yourself, you begin to relax. You stop asking, how do I make this version of me match that version of me? You stop turning your inner world into a project. You begin to allow contradictions to live side by side. The Buddhist path doesn't ask you to be one thing. It asks you to be present for whatever thing is arising, and that includes mess, confusion, and contradiction. There's a beautiful freedom in realizing you don't have to make everything make sense. Some emotions don't come with labels. Some parts of you don't need an origin story. Some shifts in mood aren't regressions. They're weather. And when you no longer demand internal harmony, you find peace in something much deeper: non-resistance. Non-resistance is not indifference. It's a deep trust in impermanence. It's what happens when you understand that the self isn't a statue to be sculpted. It's a stream to be witnessed. You're not here to create a final version of yourself. You're here to be aware of what's moving through. And yes, that challenges everything we're taught. From therapy culture to self-help to motivational quotes, we're told that the goal is to find our true self, to bring all the parts into alignment, to resolve the conflict between the child self, the parent self, the dreamer self, the wounded self. But what if they don't need to be resolved? What if they're not enemies? What if they're just parts moving in and out of the field of experience? In early Buddhist texts, even enlightenment isn't described as becoming someone perfect. It's the end of identifying as someone at all. It's the release of the illusion that the self is a fixed, unified object. And with that release comes a quiet kind of freedom, not the dramatic kind, the soft kind, the kind where you no longer wake up every day thinking, what am I supposed to be now? Instead, you rest in the awareness that watches. the awareness that doesn't demand integration, the awareness that doesn't organize identity like a shelf full of trophies, the awareness that says, "This, too, belongs," without needing to file it away. When you stop trying to collect yourself, you stop punishing yourself for changing. You stop saying, "I thought I healed this already," when an old wound reappears. You stop saying, "This isn't me," when you're suddenly irritable, tired, or lost. You realize that you is not a tightrope to walk, it's an openness to experience. And slowly, life becomes less of a personal drama and more of a dance. You stop narrating your every emotion. You stop translating your every thought into a self-judgment. You allow what's happening to be just what's happening, not a reflection of who you are, not a statement about your wholeness, just a moment. And this isn't passive, it's deeply alive. It requires presence, honesty, and humility. It means feeling your pain without building an identity around it. It means observing your joy without trying to make it permanent. It means being okay with the fact that you are a mosaic, and sometimes pieces fall out. Sometimes new ones come in, and sometimes you don't know what picture they're making. That's okay. The point is not to finish. The point is to stay awake. Letting go of integration means letting go of needing everything to fit. It means you stop asking yourself to be consistent in a world that isn't. It means you stop apologizing for shifting. It means your sense of identity becomes soft, light, breathable. And when your identity softens, so does your suffering. Because suffering thrives in tight spaces, in labels, in boxes, in "I am this" and "I am not that." But awareness has no walls. It includes it all. It watches it all. It never needs you to choose between your contradictions. It only asks you to stay present with them. So the next time you feel scattered, don't rush to collect yourself. Don't panic. Don't say, "I've lost myself." Say, "This is what it feels like to be uncontained." Say, "This is what it feels like to be alive without borders." Say, "This is what it feels like to let go of the project." Because you were never supposed to be a project. You were never supposed to be a finished product. You are awareness in motion, consciousness touching experience, spirit moving through time. And peace is not at the end of self-assembly. It's already here, underneath the need to assemble anything. So, breathe. Let the pieces be where they are. Let the questions stay open. Let the identity be porous. You don't need to get it all together. You just need to stop gripping what's falling apart. Not to abandon it, but to stop thinking it defines you. This is how Buddhism unhooks you from the pressure to make your inner world pretty. It doesn't offer integration, it offers intimacy with what is, as it is, without trying to edit the experience into something neater. The pieces don't need to come together, they need to be seen. That's where peace begins. That's where you stop collecting yourself and start returning to what's always been whole, the awareness that holds it all. And once you stop collecting yourself, something strange happens. You don't fall apart. You don't disappear. You don't become someone unrecognizable. Instead, for the first time, you breathe without trying to fit the breath into a plan. You wake up without rehearsing who you need to be. But just as that peace starts to rise, another voice shows up. Softer than shame, quieter than self-doubt. It whispers in the background, "You're not done." The mind shifts its obsession from identity to improvement, from integration to fixing. The pressure doesn't vanish, it just puts on new clothes. And now, instead of trying to become someone whole, you're trying to become someone better, constantly. That's where we go next. Self-improvement sounds innocent, encouraging even, but for many, it becomes a quiet form of war. A war dressed as wisdom, a lifelong campaign to polish the parts of yourself that someone once said weren't good enough. It starts with motivation, but ends with exhaustion. And the worst part is that it never feels finished. There's always something more to heal, something new to optimize, something else to unlock. The target keeps moving and the heart keeps chasing, all in the name of growth. But Buddhism offers a radical pause. Not against growth, but against the suffering that often hides inside it. At the heart of the Buddha's path is the middle way. Not too tight, not too loose. Not indulgence, not denial. Not apathy, not obsession. And this middle path is not just about lifestyle, it's about mindset. It's the antidote to extremes, including the subtle one that says you must constantly be working on yourself to be worthy. The idea that you are a problem to solve is one of the deepest forms of conditioning. It gets into everything. It turns your quiet moments into goals. It makes rest feel like failure. It transforms meditation into a performance. It takes your basic human experience and layers it with judgment. Suddenly, sadness isn't just sadness. It's something you shouldn't still feel. Anxiety isn't just energy. It's something you should have healed by now. And before you know it, your inner world becomes another job, another to-do list, another thing to manage. The middle way says, stop, just stop. Breathe here, feel this, without needing to label it as progress or setback, without trying to extract a lesson, without turning your life into a never-ending project. Because when you're always trying to fix yourself, you forget how to be yourself. You miss the presence that was already here, the one that never needed fixing, only noticing. This doesn't mean you never change. It means the change no longer comes from pressure. It comes from peace, from clarity, from natural unfolding, like a flower opening with the season, not forced open by hands trying to hurry spring. When you let go of the urgency to improve, something deeper begins to move. Not improvement, but understanding. Not enhancement, but release. Because the obsession with fixing yourself is often rooted in a quiet belief that you're unacceptable as you are, that some feeling, trait, or tendency makes you unworthy of rest. But Buddhism doesn't teach that peace comes after you're done working on yourself. It teaches that peace is already available right now beneath the story of who you think you need to become. When you look at the Buddha's life, you don't see a man obsessed with becoming better. You see someone who sat beneath a tree, not to achieve, but to stop seeking. Enlightenment wasn't a reward. It was the absence of grasping, the moment he realized that nothing needed to be added. That truth was already present, waiting to be seen, not earned. This is the peace beyond improvement. The state where you stop negotiating with yourself. Where you stop saying, "I'll love myself when," and instead begin to rest in the love that doesn't ask for conditions, that doesn't depend on your discipline or consistency or insight, a love that just is. Letting go of the fix-yourself urge doesn't mean you stay stuck. It means your movement becomes natural, like waves returning to the shore, like breath returning to the lungs. Growth still happens, but it's not forced. It's not driven by self-rejection. It rises from stillness, not from struggle, and that stillness has room for everything, for the parts of you that still feel lost, for the habits that still show up, for the stories that sometimes return. Stillness doesn't resist them. It watches, it holds, and in that holding, change happens, not because it has to, but because it wants to. Because when you stop squeezing life, it starts to move. The middle way invites you to notice how often your pursuit of peace creates tension, how often your search for clarity adds confusion, how often your effort to be calm becomes a new kind of noise. And when you notice that, you're free to stop, not forever, just for now, just long enough to see that the moment doesn't need anything added to be complete. This moment isn't incomplete because you haven't improved enough. It's complete because it's real. It's complete because it's here. And your task is not to fix it. It's to meet it just as it is. The more you chase becoming better, the more you move away from the awareness that has always been whole. This awareness doesn't measure. It doesn't compare. It doesn't evaluate how spiritual your thoughts are. It just observes, with clarity, with simplicity, with compassion. The urge to improve often disguises a fear of being seen, of being judged, of being left behind. But awareness doesn't leave. It doesn't shame. It doesn't hurry. And when you rest in it, you begin to feel something strange and unfamiliar. Enoughness. Not as a thought, but as a state. As a body feeling. As a breath that doesn't rush. Enoughness doesn't mean you're done. It means you don't need to become someone else to begin. You don't need to heal everything to feel peace. You don't need to be finished to be worthy of love. The middle way shows you that you don't have to go to either extreme, fixing everything or avoiding everything. You can simply be here, living gently. And when you stop trying to constantly improve, something else returns, joy. Not the high, buzzing kind, the simple kind, the kind that comes from peeling an orange in silence, from watching a leaf fall, from resting your eyes and not needing to learn a lesson. Joy that doesn't teach, it just arrives. The world will always offer more tools, more books, more techniques, and some of them may be helpful, but even the best tools can become cages if they reinforce the belief that you are never enough. The middle way says, use what helps, drop what doesn't, and always return to the place inside that doesn't need tools to be whole. This is the shift from building the perfect self to noticing the perfect presence that was already here, from effort to ease, from fixing to feeling, from climbing to resting. So if today you feel unfinished, messy, undone, good. That means you're alive. That means you're in motion. That means you're part of the natural rhythm of things. The only thing you have to do now is stop fighting that. Let the moment be as it is. Let yourself be as you are. The rest will come. And once you stop trying to fix yourself, something unexpected rises. Quiet. Not relief exactly, but stillness. Not numbness, but a kind of pause so deep it feels like the first breath after years underwater. And in that stillness, something else surfaces. Not a thought, not a goal, a presence. Younger, fragile, Waiting. The part of you that was hurt before you had words. The version of you that didn't need answers, just to be held. And suddenly, all the explanations in the world feel too loud, because what this part needs is silence. Not the absence of sound, but the kind of silence that says, "I'm here now." The kind that heals without speaking. The kind that touches without hands. That's where we're going now. Sometimes the deepest pain doesn't come from what happened. It comes from how long it was ignored, from how often it was minimized, rushed, explained away. Especially when it's the pain of the inner child, the version of you that experienced confusion, abandonment, or shame before you had the language to even describe it. And because it had no words, it got buried in the body, in the breath, in the subtle contractions that never quite release. And now, as an adult, it tries to speak, but it doesn't use words. It uses tension, fatigue, overreaction, numbness. And every time we try to fix it with language, it retreats further into silence. But here's the paradox. The silence it retreats into is also the silence that heals it. Not the cold kind, not the ignoring kind, the noble kind. The kind that Buddhist practice calls noble silence, a sacred, living presence that asks nothing and listens to everything. Noble silence isn't emptiness, it's attention without interruption. It's the quality of being with something without changing it, without trying to improve it, without trying to explain it away. It's the pause that lets old wounds breathe without being dissected. It's the absence of inner commentary that creates room for safety to return. This kind of silence doesn't look like doing. It looks like being. Being with your own history. Being with the part of you that never got closure. Not by giving it more stories, but by giving it presence. When you stop talking to your pain and simply sit beside it, something profound happens. The inner child doesn't need to be convinced that everything is okay. It just needs to feel that it's not alone anymore. Words often try to fix. Silence just stays. And sometimes the deepest apology isn't "I'm sorry" on repeat. It's "I'm here" with no conditions. It's a breath that doesn't rush to the next thought. It's a pause that doesn't need to be filled. In Buddhist retreats, noble silence is more than quiet. It's a container, a holding space, a way of practicing truth without talking about it. It's where healing happens, not because someone said the right thing, but because nothing needed to be said at all. The silence became safe. The space became enough. This is the kind of silence the inner child understands, because it's the language they spoke all along. Before sentences, before explanations, before you learned to pretend. That young part doesn't want your insights. It wants your stillness. It wants your calm breath, your grounded heart, your unhurried presence. And here's the thing. You don't have to go back and relive everything. You don't need to uncover every moment of childhood pain to heal it. You just need to stop running from the discomfort. Stop filling every quiet space with analysis. Stop trying to win the war with words. There is no argument to win. There is only presence to offer. You become the adult that part of you always needed, not by saying the perfect thing, but by refusing to turn away. You stop performing healing and start living it. And slowly, the nervous system starts to settle. The body starts to soften. The breath deepens without effort. Because when you stop attacking your past with improvement plans, it begins to trust you again. The inner child begins to believe that this time, finally, it's safe to come forward. It doesn't mean you forget. It means you stop arguing with what already happened. You stop needing to rewrite the story. You just sit in the ruins with open hands and say nothing, because nothing is needed. Silence also teaches patience. It shows you that you don't have to rush toward resolution, that sometimes the pain doesn't want to be solved. It wants to be seen, not watched with judgment, seen with soft eyes, the kind of seeing that says, "You don't have to change to be worthy of my attention." When you practice noble silence, you don't abandon your pain. You anchor beside it. You let it breathe. You let it cry without comment. You let it feel without interference. You hold the brokenness like a sleeping child, not to wake it, not to fix it, but to protect the space it takes up. And that holding is the apology, the one the inner child never received, the one that says, "I won't leave you this time." That's what heals, not insight, not strategies, but presence that doesn't flinch. And maybe for the first time, the child inside doesn't feel like a problem, doesn't feel like a burden, doesn't feel like something you need to grow out of. It becomes part of the wholeness, not because it was explained, but because it was loved without question. In Buddhist teachings, compassion isn't just a warm feeling, it's the action of staying, of remaining steady in the face of suffering, even your own, especially your own. And silence is one of the most compassionate actions you can offer yourself, because it refuses to fix, it refuses to run, it refuses to hide behind noise. This silence is not empty. It's sacred. It holds space for things words will never reach, for grief that never found its name, for fears that never found safety, for hopes that never found a voice. And in this sacred space, time begins to stretch. Old wounds lose urgency. The body finds rest. This is not a one-time event. It's a return, over and over again, returning to the silence beneath the inner dialogue, returning to the breath when thoughts become too loud, returning to presence when pain resurfaces, not to remove it, but to remain with it. And the more often you return, the more the inner child learns that healing isn't a performance. It's a posture, a choice to stay, a choice to breathe through the discomfort, a choice to listen with no goal. That's where real transformation begins. When nothing is being added and nothing is being solved, just a soft, stable presence in the middle of what once felt unbearable. You don't need to speak over your wounds. You don't need to narrate your healing. You just need to stay with what arises, without judgment, without story. That's the silence that becomes the apology. That's the stillness that becomes the home. And once you've sat in silence with your pain, without trying to change it, something softer begins to open, a kind of inner permission. You stop bracing against yourself. You stop flinching at your own emotions. You no longer run. But just because you're no longer running doesn't mean you've fully turned around. There's one more step, one that almost no one takes, one that feels unnatural at first. To not just sit with the parts of yourself you used to reject, but to bow to them. To meet your shadows, not with resistance, but with reverence. That's where we're headed now. There is power in bowing, not the kind that submits out of fear, but the kind that sees clearly, that humbles itself not before a person, but before truth. In many Buddhist traditions, bowing is not a gesture of worship, it's a practice of awareness. Each bow is a reminder that the ego is not the center of everything, that life is not something to dominate, but something to honor. And when you bow inwardly to the parts of yourself you've tried to push away, something radical happens. The war ends. The battlefield dissolves. We all carry shadows, aspects of our personality, our behavior, our history that we don't want to claim. Maybe it's a fear you try to mask with control, a jealousy you dress up as indifference, an addiction you've labeled as a bad habit, a regret you never let surface because it makes your chest feel like stone. Whatever shape it takes, the shadow is real, not because it defines you, but because it's been following you, waiting to be seen, and most people try to fix it, fight it, bury it, name it something nicer, try to transform it through effort. But Buddhism offers something different, not another attempt to destroy the shadow, but an invitation to bow, to meet the unwanted part of you with the posture of respect, not because it's good, not because it's pleasant, but because it exists. And all existence, all experience, deserves awareness. The act of bowing is symbolic. You lower yourself, not to shrink, but to honor what has been ignored. You bring the head below the heart. You let humility lead. And when you turn this outward ritual into an inward gesture, it becomes a sacred practice of reclaiming wholeness. You say, without words, I see you, to the fear, to the rage, to the compulsion, to the pain. I see you, and I will not exile you anymore. This is not the same as indulging your darkness. It's not about giving it control. It's about ending the illusion that it's separate from you, that your shadow is some foreign intruder. It's not. It's a fragment of you that was shaped by pain, starved of love, misunderstood by the mind that developed after it. And when you bow, you create a bridge between what is known and what has been hidden, between who you are and what you've avoided. To ritualize this bowing is to turn healing into a form, not abstract forgiveness, but embodied acknowledgement. You can literally bow in meditation, in a quiet room, on the floor, knees folded, hands to heart or ground. Or you can bow internally as an energetic movement of humility. You can breathe into the part of you you once disowned, and with each exhale, release judgment, not in theory, in action. And in that moment, something softens. The fear becomes less sharp. The shame becomes less tight. The regrets begin to melt at the edges. Because what the shadow feared most was not being wrong. It was being abandoned. And now you've returned. The reason this works is not mystical, it's energetic. Judgment creates contraction. Denial creates fragmentation. But presence creates reintegration. When you meet the unwanted parts of yourself with steadiness, with gentleness, the body stops bracing. The nervous system starts to believe it's safe to feel this now. And that safety is what allows healing to begin. In many Buddhist monasteries, monks bow hundreds of times a day, not because they're unworthy, but because bowing reminds them of interconnectedness, of humility, of the ego's rightful size. And this same reverence can be brought into our inner life. We bow to our flaws, not because they are holy, but because they are human. And the human deserves love. The parts of you you don't want to look at are not dangerous. What makes them dangerous is being left in the dark. What gives them power is your resistance. When you turn toward them, not with more analysis, but with a ritual of attention, they begin to soften. They stop needing to control you, because they've been seen. You can bow to your fear, not to agree with it, but to acknowledge it's there for a reason. You can bow to your habits, not to let them run your life, but to understand that they formed to protect you. You can bow to your regret, not to drown in it, but to honor the version of you that didn't know a better way. This practice is not fast, it's not flashy, but it is profound. Over time, it transforms how you see yourself. You stop dividing into good and bad. You stop trying to amputate the parts that feel ugly. You begin to understand that real peace comes not from purity, but from wholeness. And wholeness is not a feeling, it's a relationship with all that you are, even the impulses, even the memories, even the emotions that show up at the worst times. They all belong, not because they're convenient, but because they are real. You may think you need to change to be worthy of your own love, but the truth is, you only need to bow. You only need to return. You only need to stop treating the darker parts of yourself like strangers. They're not here to ruin you. They're here to be met, to be held, to be freed from exile. In this way, bowing becomes a liberation, not a loss of dignity, but the discovery of it. Dignity in seeing yourself clearly, in holding your own suffering like a sacred object, in refusing to split your soul into acceptable and unacceptable parts. And slowly, your inner world becomes quieter, not because the shadows are gone, but because they're no longer banging on locked doors. You opened them. You welcomed them in. You offered tea instead of chains. There is no peace without this gesture. You can meditate for years, read every book, perfect every ritual. But if you're still running from the parts of you that ache, you'll never feel whole. You'll always be performing. This is the freedom that comes when you bow. You stop performing. You start participating. You start showing up as the whole, messy, holy, imperfect miracle that you are. And in that showing up, you reclaim every fragment. You say to each one, "You're part of the story," and that is enough. And once you've bowed to your shadows, once you've stopped treating them like enemies and started honoring them as messengers, something else begins to stir. Not fear, not shame, but spaciousness. Because now you're no longer at war with what lives inside you. You've stopped trying to exile parts of yourself and instead welcomed them home. But even as the inner world softens, there's one more confusion that quietly lingers, a deeper layer. The belief that what you feel is what you are, that the storm inside you means something about you, that a dark moment makes a dark identity, that a bad thought makes a bad self. This illusion is subtle, but it's powerful, and now it's time to break it. Let's go there. There are moments when the mind is loud, thoughts race, emotions tighten, stories loop in circles. You feel stuck, flooded, heavy, and almost instantly the identification happens. I'm anxious. I'm failing. I'm broken again. The language is quick. It moves faster than breath, but beneath it is a misunderstanding. The idea that just because a storm is passing through you, it means the storm is you. Vipassana, the Buddhist practice of clear seeing, offers a different view. It teaches that thoughts and feelings are not your identity. They are passing events in consciousness. Weather, not architecture. Wind, not structure. And just like you don't become the rain when it falls, you don't become your anxiety when it arises. You are not the storm. You are the sky it moves through. This insight sounds simple, but living it changes everything. Because when you believe you are your inner turmoil, you suffer twice. First, from the emotion itself. Then, from the story that says the emotion defines you. Vipassana invites you to end that second layer of suffering. It doesn't ask you to suppress your experience. It asks you to see it as it is, without merging into it. This practice is not about escaping pain. It's about witnessing it with enough clarity that you stop drowning in it. When sadness arises, instead of saying, "I am sad," you notice, sadness is present. When anger flares, instead of, "I am angry," you observe, anger is moving through. That tiny shift in language reflects a massive shift in consciousness. You are not the wave. You are the awareness watching it rise and fall. Vipassana trains you to observe your experience without judgment, without clinging, without rejection. You begin by focusing on the breath, not to change it, but to learn how to pay attention. The breath is always here, always neutral. And when the mind wanders, as it will, you don't scold it. You bring it back, gently, again and again. This builds the muscle of witnessing. Then you apply that same attention to sensations. Maybe there's tension in the chest, tightness in the jaw, heat in the stomach. Instead of labeling or fixing, you observe. You notice where it begins, how it pulses, how it fades. You stay close without getting pulled in. This is how you start to see. Everything that arises, passes. No emotion is permanent, no thought is solid. They all come and go like clouds in an open sky. And as your practice deepens, you realize something else. The storms aren't random, they're conditioned. They arise from past experiences, from habits, from mental patterns that were formed through repetition. But just because they were conditioned doesn't mean they're permanent. And just because they're loud doesn't mean they're true. Vipassana gives you distance, but not the kind that disconnects, the kind that liberates. Because when you stop fusing with your thoughts, you start seeing them for what they are, mental events, not facts, not threats, just ripples of energy that will pass if left alone. You also start to notice how quickly the mind tries to build stories. One uncomfortable emotion, and suddenly there's a narrative. I'll never be okay. This always happens. Something's wrong with me. But when you slow down and observe the actual sensation underneath those thoughts, you find something much less dramatic. A flicker, a vibration, a tightening. And that's it. The story was the storm. The body was just weather. This is the freedom of non-identification. You don't need your mind to be silent to feel peace. You just need to stop mistaking it for your identity. You don't need to force positivity. You just need to stop clinging to every negative thought like it's carved in stone. In the beginning, this is hard. The pull of identity is strong. Thoughts don't just pass through. You grab them, explain them, rehearse them. Emotions don't just move, they become who you are. But over time, with practice, you begin to recognize the space between stimulus and response. The small pause, the breath before the story. And in that space is your power, the power to choose awareness instead of reaction. And when you make that choice often enough, it becomes natural. You still feel, you still think, but you no longer collapse into every experience. You become like a mountain, still, grounded, even as clouds and storms swirl around its peak. The Buddha didn't become awakened because his mind was quiet. He became awakened because he stopped being trapped by its noise. He saw clearly. He saw that every sensation was impermanent, that every thought was just movement, that identity was a fiction, and in that seeing, he found peace. This is what Vipassana teaches, not silence, but clarity, not control, but release. You're allowed to feel everything without becoming any of it. You're allowed to think deeply without letting thought define your value. You're allowed to suffer without building an identity around your wounds. You are not the storm. You are the one watching the sky. And when you start living this truth, something profound happens. You stop panicking when the mind gets loud. You stop blaming yourself for being human. You stop interpreting every emotional spike as a sign of failure. Instead, you breathe, you observe, you wait. And slowly, the mind calms on its own, not because you forced it, but because you stopped feeding it with fear. This practice also creates compassion. When you see your own inner storms clearly, you stop judging others for theirs. You recognize the same patterns, the same habits, the same loops, and instead of reacting, you hold space. You become a calm presence in a world of turbulence. Not because you've escaped the storm, but because you've remembered you were never it. So the next time you feel overwhelmed, try this. Close your eyes. Feel your breath. Notice where the tension lives. Name the emotion, not as an identity, but as a visitor. Fear is present. Grief is passing through. Restlessness is here. And then, do nothing. Just stay. Just watch. Just let it be what it is. And let yourself be what you are. The sky. And once you stop identifying with the storm, once you learn to sit in the center of chaos without becoming it, there's one more layer that begins to flicker into view. It doesn't shout. It narrates. Quietly. Constantly. It assigns meaning. It labels every experience. It draws conclusions about who you are, what you deserve, how your story ends. It sounds like truth, but it's just a voice, the voice of the inner narrator. And if the storm is weather, this voice is the scriptwriter, the one who spins every cloud into a story. And now, it's time to take the script out of its hands. That's where we go next. The inner narrator is familiar. It's the part of the mind that explains your life to you, moment by moment, like a commentary you never signed up for. It tells you why things happen. It judges what you're doing. It predicts how people see you. It writes your identity with every thought. You're not good enough. This always happens. You'll never change. You don't belong here. It feels automatic, but it's not. It's a habit, a mental reflex born from years of interpretation, protection, and control. Vipassana helps you see emotions as passing weather. But what about the voice behind the emotions? The one that says what the weather means about you? That voice is what keeps the pain alive. Not the experience itself, but the commentary attached to it. The story. You're not just feeling anxiety, you're being told a story about what that anxiety says about your value. You're not just feeling sadness, you're being narrated into a character who is broken, helpless, or weak. The suffering doesn't come from the feeling alone. It comes from believing the story wrapped around it. And this is where Buddhist mindfulness offers a powerful tool: noting. Noting is the practice of labeling thoughts and mental movements in the most neutral way possible. Instead of merging with the story, you name it. Planning, judging, worrying, remembering. You don't explain it. You don't argue with it. You don't fix it. You just label it and let it pass. This practice does something subtle but life-changing. It breaks the trance. It creates a tiny wedge between awareness and narrative. Instead of being inside the thought, you're observing it. Instead of acting from the script, you're seeing the script as it is, just words. Not truth, not destiny, not identity, just words rising and falling in a space of silence. And in that silence, something softer emerges. A peace that doesn't need the story to end. A freedom that doesn't depend on a happy ending. Because once you stop editing the script, you realize it was never the story that needed changing. It was your relationship to it. You've spent years trying to revise the inner narrator, trying to correct its tone, reframe its conclusions, replace negative self-talk with affirmations. But even that can become a trap. Because if you're still writing a new script, you're still in the story. You're still identifying with a version of yourself that only exists in thought. True peace comes when you stop being the character and remember you're the screen the movie is playing on. You don't need to silence the narrator, you just need to stop obeying it. When the mind says, "You're failing," you note, "Judging." When it says, "No one respects me," you note, "Story." When it says, "This shouldn't be happening," you note, "Resistance." That's it. No debate, no explanation, just awareness. And what happens next is not always immediate. The narrator doesn't vanish in a single sitting. It will return. It will adapt. It will try to sound more spiritual, more reasonable. It might even start narrating your meditation. You're doing this right. This is how peace feels. That too is story. Note it. Let it pass. The goal is not to kill the voice. The goal is to see it, and in seeing it, to stop being controlled by it. There's an ancient teaching that says, "Thoughts are visitors. Let them come and go. Just don't serve them tea." But most of us not only serve tea, we hand over the keys, rearrange the furniture, and let them move in. Noting ends that habit, not with aggression, but with clarity. You let them knock, you nod politely, and you let them walk away. This practice is gentle, but it's not passive. It takes effort to notice without reacting. It takes discipline to name the thought without becoming the thought. And some stories will pull harder than others. The story of being unlovable, the story of being too late, the story of being too much. These scripts are sticky because they're old. They were written when you were too young to question them. But now you can. Not with new affirmations, not with intellectual arguments, but with silence, with stillness, with a clear, unflinching gaze that says, "This is not me. This is just a thought, and I do not have to follow it." As you continue this practice, you'll start to feel a gap widen inside. Not a gap of emptiness, but a gap of freedom. The space between thought and self, between script and awareness. And in that space, there is nothing to prove, nothing to perform, no identity to maintain, just presence. You'll stop needing the story to validate you. You'll stop needing the narrator to praise you. You'll stop fearing its criticism, because none of it sticks unless you believe it. And now you see it for what it is. And maybe for the first time, you'll start to hear the silence underneath the narration, the quiet that was there before thought, before interpretation, before memory. That silence is your true nature. That silence is what hears the voice. That silence is the self that cannot be harmed. In that space, you can feel sadness without being a sad person. You can notice doubt without being lost. You can hear the script whisper, "You're not enough," and smile, not in defiance, but in recognition. Ah, there it is again, just a story, and you move on. No defense needed, no counter-narrative required, just awareness. This is what it means to burn the old scripts, not with anger, not with violence, but with the fire of awareness, the flame that sees clearly and lets go. You are not the stories your mind tells you. You are not the character in a plotline built from fear. You are the awareness behind the words, the silence behind the thoughts, the space where nothing needs to be rewritten to be free. And once you see the inner narrator for what it is, just a story machine, you begin to notice something else. The silence that follows, the space where thought no longer sticks, where the old scripts lose their grip. But in that quiet, another habit may rise. Not noise, but scrutiny. A sharp gaze turned inward, not judgment in words, but in how you look at yourself. A constant scanning, a tension around your attention. Even without the stories, the eyes of the mind can stay hard. And the next shift requires more than awareness. It requires softness, a new way of looking, a different kind of seeing, not through analysis, but through kindness. That's where we go now. Most people associate loving kindness with other people. You think of metta as wishing peace for someone far away, someone suffering, someone struggling. But the real challenge and the real transformation comes when you turn that gaze inward, when you direct that same warmth toward yourself. Not just your outer identity, but your thoughts, your tendencies, your flaws, the parts you still hesitate to claim. Because even after you stop believing your thoughts, you might still be watching them with tightness. You might still be observing your habits with an edge. You notice your fear and immediately brace. You witness a craving and instantly recoil. You recognize a reactive moment and think, there it is again, not with curiosity, but with disappointment. This is where soft attention becomes necessary. Loving kindness meditation, or metta bhavana, isn't about forcing affection. It's about learning to hold your experience with a heart that doesn't clench. It's not sentimentality. It's not fantasy. It's a practice of attention, a deliberate choice to look with warmth, even when what you're seeing is uncomfortable. You begin by offering goodwill. Simple phrases. May I be well. May I be safe. May I be at peace. Not because you feel it, but because you're learning how to offer it. At first, it feels mechanical, but over time, something begins to shift. The words are no longer distant. They start to soften the way you hold yourself. And that softening isn't weakness, it's medicine. Because harsh awareness is just another form of defense, a way of trying to stay in control, a way of making sure you catch your mistakes before someone else does. But that kind of awareness doesn't heal. It only tightens the wound. When you bring metta to your awareness, you stop approaching your inner world like a judge. You stop treating each thought like a test. You stop holding your breath every time an old emotion resurfaces. You breathe into the moment and say, "You're allowed to be here," even to the craving, even to the impatience, even to the tightness in your chest. Gentle attention does not mean passive. It means patient, present, willing to be with what is, without rushing to fix or name or escape it. It means seeing your fear and thinking, "Of course you're here. I've carried you for a long time." It means noticing your defensiveness and offering understanding instead of scolding. "I see you. You're trying to protect something." This shift from sharp awareness to soft awareness changes everything. It changes how the nervous system responds. It changes how long emotions linger. It changes the way you walk through each day. Because when you stop approaching yourself like a project and start approaching yourself like someone worthy of kindness, the healing starts to happen without effort. Metta also reveals how many layers of self-rejection you've been carrying. All the times you criticized yourself for being too much, too sensitive, too tired. All the moments you blamed yourself for not being farther along. When you begin offering kindness instead of critique, those layers start to dissolve, slowly, gently, without force. And this kindness isn't just mental. It becomes embodied. You start to rest more fully. You breathe more deeply. You pause more often. You notice how you speak to yourself in the small moments, the missed text, the forgotten item, the awkward silence. And instead of attacking yourself, you place a hand on your heart and whisper, "Still learning, still worthy." Soft eyes don't deny what's happening. They don't sugarcoat your patterns. They simply refuse to turn experience into punishment. They choose to stay, to see, and to love anyway. Even when it's messy, even when it's uncomfortable. This is what Buddhist compassion means in practice. It's not just an ideal. It's the way you treat your thoughts when they rise. It's the tone you use with yourself after a mistake. It's the silence you offer instead of judgment. The pause before you shame yourself. The breath before you collapse into guilt. And yes, this takes practice, especially if you've spent years equating growth with critique. If your path has been paved with high standards and tight discipline, metta can feel unfamiliar. But with repetition, it becomes natural. You start to default to tenderness instead of tension. You begin each morning not with a checklist of how to improve, but with a gentle wish. May I move through this day with care. You end each night not by replaying mistakes, but by whispering, "You did your best today. Rest now." This soft gaze becomes your foundation, and from it, real change arises. Not because you forced it, but because you created the conditions where growth could happen safely, where your nervous system didn't have to brace, where your heart didn't have to defend, where your soul could simply unfold. So if you find yourself slipping back into harshness, pause. If you notice the inner critic sharpening its tone, pause. If you feel your awareness turning into surveillance, pause. Breathe. Place a hand on your chest and say something simple. May I meet this moment with kindness. That's it. One phrase, one breath, one shift. Because peace doesn't live in perfection. It lives in the way you return to yourself after wandering. It lives in the softness of your attention, in the way your awareness bends without breaking. You are not here to be flawless. You are here to be whole. And wholeness begins with how you see. And once you begin seeing yourself with soft eyes, once your awareness stops cutting and starts holding, another possibility begins to reveal itself. A quality you might not have felt in years. Stillness. Not the stillness of forced silence or mental effort, but the kind that comes when the fight leaves your body. When your inner gaze no longer stirs every moment into meaning. But as soon as that stillness starts to rise, the mind returns, asking, what's next? Grasping, stirring, picking at the piece before it can settle. This is where clarity slips away, not because it's absent, but because it's buried beneath a surface that won't stay calm. Now, it's time to stop stirring and simply let the water sit. That's where we begin next. There's a rare but powerful image used in early Buddhist texts, a glass of muddy water. The more you shake it, the more clouded it becomes. But if you set it down, if you simply stop moving, the mud settles on its own, slowly, naturally, without force, and the water becomes clear, not because you cleaned it, but because you stopped disturbing it. This metaphor isn't just poetic, it's precise. The mind is like that glass. Thoughts, emotions, judgments, they're the sediment. And the more you try to fix, analyze, rearrange, or suppress your experience, the more you keep the mud moving. Even self-awareness, when laced with urgency, can become agitation. But the moment you stop interfering, clarity begins to rise. Stillness is not empty, it's alive. It's where the real seeing happens, the kind of seeing that doesn't come from thinking, but from being. When the mind stops grasping, the truth beneath your confusion begins to appear on its own. Not because you forced it into place, but because you finally created space for it to emerge. This isn't passive. It's not resignation. It's precision through non-reactivity. And it's one of the hardest things to practice, because everything in modern life encourages the opposite. When there's emotional discomfort, the reflex is to fix, to problem solve, to analyze, to talk it through. But all of that is stirring, and stirring keeps the mud suspended. Letting the mud settle requires restraint, not as suppression, but as a kind of sacred patience. You sit, you breathe, you notice the discomfort. You don't push it away, but you also don't move toward it. You don't dramatize it. You don't label it with a story. You let it be there, and you stop trying to speed up the process. It's uncomfortable at first, because when the water is muddy, the instinct is to get clearer by doing something. But clarity doesn't arise from action. It arises from stillness. This stillness doesn't mean freezing. It means non-interference. It means learning the art of non-stirring. You may feel restlessness, a desire to dig deeper, a thought that says, I need to figure this out. But figuring out is another form of movement. It keeps the sediment floating. Clarity is already beneath the surface. It's the natural state of the mind, before interference. Your work is not to create it. Your work is to stop blocking it. This practice of letting the mud settle teaches trust, not in the mind, but in the nature of awareness itself. In the same way that a wound knows how to heal if left undisturbed, the heart knows how to find balance if you don't keep reopening it. The mind knows how to clear if you stop demanding clarity from it. And this is where peace becomes available, not as a reward, but as a return. A return to the quiet that was always underneath. You realize that the water didn't need fixing. It needed stillness. The mud was never a mistake. It just needed time. In meditation, you can feel this directly. You sit with your discomfort, with your restlessness, with the chaos in your chest. You want to shift, to fidget, to solve, but you don't. You stay, you breathe, you do nothing on purpose. And something begins to change, not quickly, not dramatically, but steadily. The thoughts slow, the breath deepens, the sensations settle, and beneath it all, something opens. This clarity isn't conceptual. It doesn't arrive in sentences. It arrives in space. It shows up as the absence of confusion, the absence of noise. Not because you silenced anything, but because everything ran out of momentum. That's the power of non-reactivity. It doesn't force change. It allows truth to reveal itself. And what's revealed might not be what you expected. It might be a quiet grief, a tender memory, a deeper understanding that doesn't need to be put into words. Or it might be nothing at all, just stillness, just presence. And even that, especially that, is clarity. Letting the mud settle also trains humility. Because the ego wants answers fast. It wants emotional puzzles solved in one sitting. But healing doesn't obey urgency. Truth doesn't rise on command. And the deepest insights often arrive long after the question has been dropped. The mind may say, "You should be doing something," but the still water knows otherwise. It says, "Stay here." Not because staying is productive, but because staying is honest. You're not rushing toward a better version of yourself. You're standing still long enough to see that the self never needed to be chased in the first place. This kind of clarity changes your life, not by what it adds, but by what it reveals in the absence of noise. You start to see relationships more clearly, patterns more clearly, desires more clearly. You stop needing certainty and start trusting presence. You stop needing closure and start finding peace in openness. And maybe the most surprising thing is that clarity doesn't feel like control. It feels like spaciousness, like nothing is wrong, like you can breathe again, not because every question was answered, but because the questions stopped tightening your chest. This is how the muddy water heals, by being still, by being patient, by being allowed to be unclear for as long as it needs. And in that permission, clarity is no longer a goal. It's a natural result, a byproduct of letting go. So the next time you feel clouded, try this. Don't fix, don't solve, don't stir. Sit, breathe, let the thoughts swirl, let the emotions churn, but don't touch them, don't explain them, Don't label them as failure. Just hold the glass still. Let the mud settle. And what rises next will not be forced clarity. It will be your own stillness remembered. And once the mud begins to settle, once you've tasted that rare clarity that only stillness brings, a new challenge quietly rises. The mind notices the peace and immediately wants to replicate it, chase it, own it, turn it into a personal milestone, a success, a proof that you've finally made it. But in doing so, something tightens again. The stillness gets stirred not by pain, but by ambition, not by fear, but by effort. You start trying to earn what already belonged to you, and without realizing it, the inner calm becomes another role to perform, another standard to reach, another mask to wear. This is the trap of spiritual performance, and it's time to end the audition. That's where we go next. There's a subtle pressure that creeps into the practice of self-awareness. At first, the goal is to feel better, to suffer less, to find peace. But then, the mind starts measuring, comparing, performing. You meditate not just to sit, but to become a calm person. You reflect not just to understand, but to be more spiritual. The process becomes a show. For others, yes, but more dangerously, for yourself. A quiet performance for the internal judge who's never satisfied. This happens because the ego is clever. When it can no longer feed on material achievements, it shifts. It starts feeding on inner ones. It uses the language of awakening, presence, and peace. But it still wants to be special. It wants to be enlightened, not because it values truth, but because it wants superiority. It doesn't care if you're free. It cares if you look like someone who is. And suddenly, peace becomes something to deserve, something to earn, something that you don't yet have, but might achieve if you just keep trying harder. You chase stillness like a promotion. You treat meditation like a test. You wear your progress like a resume. But inner peace cannot be performed. It cannot be performed for others, and it cannot be performed for yourself. It is not something you reach by perfect posture or the right playlist or the cleanest routine. It is not waiting for you at the end of your next insight. It arrives when you stop trying to appear peaceful and simply let yourself be as you are. Buddhism reminds us that striving, even for good things, is still grasping. And all grasping leads to suffering, even spiritual grasping, especially spiritual grasping, because it disguises itself as wisdom. But what it really hides is resistance. Resistance to being human, resistance to imperfection, resistance to the mess of your own aliveness. When you strive for inner peace, you create tension, not just in your body, but in your identity. You believe that calmness makes you worthy, that stillness makes you valid, and that when you feel scattered, lost, or restless, you've failed. But there is no failure in being human. There is only the pressure to hide it. You are allowed to be in pain. You are allowed to lose your balance. You are allowed to be on the path without having to prove that you belong on it. You don't need to audition for your own inner silence. True spiritual practice is not impressive. It's not dramatic. It's quiet, unremarkable, invisible from the outside. It shows up in how you breathe during a hard conversation, how you pause before reacting, how you forgive yourself when the thoughts won't stop. And that kind of peace can never be earned, because it was never being withheld. It was only being delayed by the belief that you didn't deserve it yet, that you hadn't worked hard enough, that you weren't spiritual enough. But the truth is this: peace is not a prize. It's a resting place, one that's always available the moment you stop running. The idea of being ready for peace is another lie the ego tells. You don't need to be pure to feel calm. You don't need to be fixed to be free. You don't need to be a certain kind of person. You only need to stop performing. And when you do, the whole inner landscape changes. You stop trying to appear wise and start allowing yourself to be confused. You stop curating your emotions and start letting them speak. You stop managing your thoughts and start observing them without panic. This doesn't mean you abandon the path. It means you walk it barefoot, without costume, without props, without needing your steps to look beautiful. It means you stop trying to do it right, because even that is ego. The need to perform the correct version of healing, the need to follow the perfect script. But healing doesn't follow a script. It's messy, uneven, honest. And sometimes it looks like stillness. Sometimes it looks like falling apart. But peace is not what happens when everything feels good. It's what happens when you stop pretending, when you stop editing your experience to make it more acceptable, when you stop thinking of yourself as a problem to fix, when you stop chasing the image of who you think a peaceful person should be and just return to who you actually are. In Buddhist terms, this is non-striving. It doesn't mean apathy. It means your actions don't come from lack. Your practice doesn't come from shame. Your discipline doesn't come from insecurity. It comes from care, from presence, from returning, not reaching. And when you stop striving, everything softens. Your shoulders, your jaw, your timeline. You don't rush your emotions through the door. You don't scrub your thoughts until they shine. You just sit. You breathe. And you trust that being here is enough. Because it is. Even when your breath is shaky. Even when your thoughts are loud. Even when your body feels like chaos. You are enough. Not because you've earned peace, but because peace doesn't need a reason to reach you. It's what's left when the grasping stops. So, if you feel like you're not doing enough, pause. If you feel like peace is still far away, pause. If you feel like you're failing because you're not always calm, pause. And in that pause, ask yourself, am I performing peace or am I resting in it? Then stop the audition, take off the mask, let go of the role. Sit as you are, not as you think you should be, and let the truth meet you there. And once you stop auditioning for inner peace, once you give up the performance and sit in your own presence without needing to prove anything, a quiet truth rises from beneath all the effort. Something deeper than calm, something older than shame. The realization that you're still holding on, not just to expectations or emotions, but to identities, versions of yourself that were built to survive, to be liked, to belong. Versions that served a purpose once, but now only keep you small, and now that you're no longer performing, it's time to let them die. That's where we go next. There are identities we wear without even knowing it. Roles stitched together from memories, fears, praise, and pain. They form early: the good child, the achiever, the strong one, the peacemaker, the rebel, the overthinker, the caretaker. These roles once protected us. They helped us function. They made us feel safe or seen, but over time, they become prisons. You forget that you put the costume on and start to believe that the costume is you. But Buddhist practice teaches that the self, this thing you call me, is not solid. It's not permanent. It's not even necessary. It's a collection of patterns, movements, attachments. Ego is not just arrogance or vanity. It's every part of you that believes it must hold a shape to survive. And because these shapes were useful once, the thought of letting them go feels like death. But that death is sacred, because when an old identity dies, freedom takes its place. The graveyard of the self is not a loss. It's a garden. Each identity you lay down becomes compost. It fertilizes the ground of awareness. It allows something softer to grow. Ego death is not violent. It's not dramatic. It's not about rejecting yourself. It's about releasing the version of you that no longer serves. It's the soft shedding of a layer that's become too tight. A quiet burial of a name that no longer fits. And this letting go isn't mental. It's felt in the body. It's the weight that lifts when you stop pretending to be strong. The exhale that comes when you stop trying to be the smartest person in the room. The tears that fall when you realize you no longer need to be the one who always keeps it together. In meditation, ego death can be practiced gently. You sit, you breathe, and you allow yourself to ask, who am I when I stop clinging to roles? Who am I when I stop needing to be seen a certain way? Who am I when I stop naming myself by my thoughts? At first, the answer feels like nothing. No identity rushes in to fill the space. It feels like emptiness. But stay. Stay with the emptiness, because it's not the absence of self, it's the presence of truth. The self that can be named is never the whole story. The self that dissolves is not your essence, it's your container. And when the container breaks, awareness spills into everything. You stop living from I am this or I am not that. You stop reacting from a fixed self-image. You stop defending a version of yourself that you created decades ago just to survive middle school or earn love from a distracted parent. You let it die, and what's left isn't a blank slate. It's space. Soft, open, breathing space, where presence becomes the only identity, where the only name that matters is here. This kind of death is healing because it doesn't destroy, it unburdens. It lets the masks slip off so the skin underneath can finally breathe. And yes, some of these identities will try to return. They'll whisper, "You need me." They'll say, "Without me, who are you?" But you don't need to answer. You only need to breathe. Let them speak. Let them fade. Let them fall. Let them die. And it will feel strange at first. To no longer need to be the helpful one. To no longer introduce yourself by your wounds. To no longer shrink into the shape of someone's expectations. But slowly, that strangeness becomes relief. You don't owe the world a consistent identity. You don't need to be understood in order to be free. The truth is, most of what you've called personality is just pattern. Most of what you've defended as who you are is just repetition. And when you stop repeating, the pattern ends. The self that was built from it dissolves, and something truer, quieter, remains. This is why Buddhists bow to impermanence. Not because change is easy, but because clinging is suffering. When you hold on to a fixed idea of who you are, you trap yourself. And when life moves in ways that don't match that idea, you break. Not because life is cruel, but because you refused to change shape. But the real self doesn't break, because it doesn't cling. It watches, it adapts, it rests in silence, it trusts the letting go. And when you live from that place, your whole relationship with suffering shifts. You no longer say, "This shouldn't be happening to me," because there is no fixed me for it to happen to. You feel pain, but you don't become a victim. You feel joy, but you don't become attached. You move through life like water, fluid, full, free. So how do you practice ego death without force? You start by noticing where you resist change, where you keep rehearsing old roles, where you flinch at the idea of being seen differently. Then you soften. You don't attack the identity. You thank it. You say, "You kept me safe once, but I don't need you now," and you let it fall. You don't need to replace it. You don't need to build a better version. You just sit in the space that opens and trust that presence is enough. And in that space, you might find a kind of peace you've never known. A peace that doesn't depend on who you are. A peace that welcomes every feeling, every silence, every breath, without needing to name it. Because the self that needed a name is gone. You're not unfinished. You're unfolding. You're not unworthy. You're undefined. You're not lost. You're just no longer clinging to a map drawn by someone who never really knew you. Let it die. Let the old self return to the earth. Let the performance fall into stillness. Let the mask dissolve in silence. And let the space that remains become your home. And once the old identities fall, once the roles collapse and the storylines go quiet, you're left in a strange and unfamiliar place. Not lost, not broken, but wide open. And in that openness, the mind does what it always does when things get still. It starts asking questions. Why am I here? What's the point of this? What am I supposed to do now that I'm not who I used to be? It reaches for purpose, like a hand reaching for a wall in the dark. And here's the twist. Maybe there is no wall. Maybe there is no final answer. And maybe that's not a problem. Maybe that's peace. That's where we go now. There is a deep and quiet suffering that hides beneath the search for meaning. It doesn't scream, it hums, a constant tension behind the eyes, a pressure in the chest that says, "Make this count. Prove your worth. Find your purpose. Make it make sense." From childhood, we are taught to believe that life must have a reason, that pain must serve a higher function, that every moment must be folded neatly into a narrative. But Buddhism offers a different path, not a hopeless one, but a freer one, the path of letting go. The mind wants meaning the same way it wants safety. It builds frameworks, assigns labels, creates timelines. It takes everything you feel and demands to know what it's for. What does this sadness say about your growth? What lesson are you meant to learn from this failure? What purpose does your suffering serve? And if it can't find an answer, it panics. It declares the moment a waste. It calls you lost. But this panic only comes from one belief, that life must mean something in order to be worth living. What if that belief is wrong? Not wrong in a cynical way, wrong in a liberating way. Because if there's no grand narrative to live up to, no cosmic scorecard to fulfill, then you're allowed to live fully, lightly, honestly. You're allowed to feel without decoding every sensation. You're allowed to move without needing it to be progress. You're allowed to rest, not as recovery, but as life itself. The pressure to make everything meaningful can become its own kind of cage. Every emotion gets turned into a signal. Every silence gets turned into an opportunity for growth. Every experience is weighed down by expectation. The ordinary gets rejected. The quiet gets ignored. And you become a project again, this time a spiritual one. But peace doesn't need purpose. It needs space. Space to exist without needing to justify itself. Like the sky, like a mountain, like breath. These things don't mean anything. They are not trying to become something else. They are not valuable because of their function. They just are. And in their being, they reveal a truth deeper than any story. Existence is enough. When you stop chasing meaning, you don't become empty. You become free. You feel the wind and stop asking what it's trying to teach you. You hear your own heartbeat and stop wondering if it signals progress. You laugh without needing to trace it back to healing. You suffer without needing it to be profound. You start to see the sacred in the unremarkable. This is not apathy. This is intimacy. It's being with life so fully that you no longer need to explain it. It's what Zen calls suchness, the isness of things, the raw, untouched moment before the mind adds a label. A tree is not a metaphor. A tear is not a lesson. A breath is not a step on the path. They are complete in their own right. The peace of pointlessness is not the absence of value. It's the absence of pressure. It's what happens when you realize that being alive doesn't have to be earned. You're allowed to exist. Even if your life never changes the world. Even if your story never inspires anyone. Even if no one understands what you're going through. The fact that you are here is enough. Letting go of the need for meaning also softens your relationship with time. You stop trying to make every day productive. You stop measuring your worth by how much you accomplish. You stop dividing your life into chapters that lead to a perfect ending. And in doing so, you finally arrive in the only moment that's real. This changes how you respond to pain, not by making it disappear, but by removing the burden to make it profound. You can grieve without needing to call it transformation. You can sit in confusion without needing to name it as clarity in the making. You can hurt without needing to reframe it as growth. And in that honesty, you actually begin to heal. Because the soul doesn't need interpretation. It needs presence. It needs someone to stay, to breathe with it, to witness it without judgment or agenda. When you stop needing your suffering to be useful, it softens. It stops performing. It becomes less like a riddle to solve and more like a storm to watch pass. And when you stop performing meaning, your joy changes too. It becomes lighter. You laugh because it feels good, not because you're finally healed. You smile because something is beautiful, not because it confirms your progress. You enjoy the taste of food, the sound of music, the texture of a breeze, not because they add to your story, but because they are here. This is the liberation that comes when you release the pressure to matter. You become gentler, not because you've figured life out, but because you've stopped needing to. You start letting people be as they are. You stop turning every conversation into a breakthrough. You let silence be just silence. You let love be just love. And the fear begins to fade. The fear that your life isn't significant enough, that you'll waste your potential, that you'll never find your purpose. Those fears lose their grip when you realize there's nothing to prove, that there is no final report card waiting for you at the end, that the purpose of life is not to be meaningful, it's to be lived. You are not an unfinished book. You are not a story in need of resolution. You are not a lesson waiting to be understood. You are a moment, a breath, a flicker of consciousness in an infinite sky, and that is more than enough. So, let go. Let go of the pressure to explain yourself. Let go of the burden to make every step symbolic. Let go of the need to attach purpose to your pain. And see what happens when you just let it be what it is. That's the peace of pointlessness. That's the freedom of nothing left to prove. And once you stop forcing everything to have meaning, once you stop turning life into a test that must be passed or a puzzle that must be solved, you begin to see the moment for what it is. You stop clinging to grand purpose and finally notice the breeze, the ordinary, the breath. But even then, something subtle can pull you back. A feeling, a mood, a fog that rolls in without warning. And suddenly, it seems like you've lost your peace again. But maybe peace was never lost. Maybe you've just mistaken the weather for the sky. That's where we go next. Emotions come and go, but most people treat them like permanent facts. A sudden wave of sadness becomes, something's wrong with me. A flash of anger becomes, I'm failing again. A stretch of emptiness becomes, I've lost myself. We don't just feel feelings, we build identities out of them. And once we do, we carry their weight as if they define who we are. But Buddhism teaches something softer, something more honest. That moods are not you. They're just weather passing through the landscape of your awareness. This doesn't mean your emotions aren't real. It means they're not fixed, not final, not evidence of a broken self. The storm doesn't damage the sky. It moves through it, leaves no scar. And in the same way, sadness doesn't ruin your spirit. Fear doesn't stain your worth. Anger doesn't erase your clarity. They visit, they move, they leave. This perspective changes everything. Because when you treat emotion as weather, you stop resisting it. You stop panicking when it changes. You stop turning a bad morning into a bad identity. You begin to witness what's happening without collapsing into it. It starts with observation, noticing when a feeling arises, not as truth, but as experience. Ah, sadness is here. Tension in the chest, heaviness in the eyes. No story, no judgment, no need to fix, just a gentle acknowledgement, like watching a cloud form in the distance. You don't try to name the cloud or predict how long it will stay. You simply let it be what it is. This is not detachment in the cold sense. It's intimacy without fusion. You're not ignoring the feeling. You're holding it without becoming it. You let it rise, move, and pass. And if it lingers longer than expected, you breathe with it. You make space for it instead of trying to squeeze it out. The mind often wants quick resolution. It wants to assign the emotion a cause, a meaning, a solution. But most moods don't need solving. They need seeing. They need room to exist without pressure. When you create that room, emotions soften on their own. The heat cools. The fog lifts. Not because you forced it, but because you stopped feeding it with panic. Treating emotion as weather also builds trust. You begin to see that no feeling lasts forever. Even the sharpest anxiety eventually fades. Even the deepest loneliness eventually shifts. There's a rhythm to the inner world, just like nature, and the more you observe that rhythm, the less you fear it. You know that when the rain comes, the sun is not gone, it's just behind the clouds. The same is true of peace. The same is true of you. This shift also helps you avoid self-rejection, because when you believe your emotions define you, you start to judge yourself by your weather. A calm week makes you feel wise. An anxious day makes you feel broken. But this is illusion. The weather is not the climate, and the climate is not the earth. You are not your temporary storms. You are the awareness that holds them. This awareness becomes your shelter. When the wind picks up and the mood darkens, you go inward, not to escape, but to anchor. You breathe, you watch. You remember that nothing you're feeling is proof of failure. It's proof that you're alive, and some weather is harder to sit with. Shame, for instance, feels like it will never end. But it does. It always does. It's just a thick fog. It doesn't speak truth. It speaks memory. You don't need to argue with it. Just don't give it your name. Don't say, "I am ashamed." Say, "Shame is here," and that small change saves you. This also frees your relationships. Because when you stop identifying with your moods, you stop making them other people's responsibility. You feel low, but you don't blame. You feel reactive, but you don't lash out. You begin to say, "I'm feeling this, and I know it's passing." That kind of clarity is a gift to yourself and to everyone you meet. Emotions also stop being so dramatic. You stop being surprised by your own humanity. You stop labeling every shift as a spiritual crisis. You expect the rain. You carry your awareness like an umbrella. You know that discomfort doesn't need to be removed. It needs to be respected. And when joy arrives, you hold it lightly too. Not because you don't trust it, but because you know it's part of the cycle. Joy is not proof that you've arrived. It's just another breeze, a welcome one, but not the final one. The truth is, peace doesn't come from mastering your mood. It comes from not making your mood mean anything about your worth. Peace lives in the space between the clouds, the part of you that sees without clinging, without resisting, the part that can stand in the rain and not call it punishment, that can sit in stillness and not call it progress, that can feel deeply without turning feeling into identity. This is emotional maturity, not emotional control, but emotional freedom. The freedom to feel without fear, the freedom to stay soft even when the sky darkens, the freedom to wait without needing to predict what comes next. So next time something rises, pause, name it gently. This is sadness. This is tightness. This is fear. Then breathe. Don't follow it. Don't fight it. Let it pass like a cloud. Let it wash over you like rain. Let it swirl like wind. And let yourself remain unchanged, untouched, present. Because you are not your sadness. You are not your joy. You are not your clarity or your confusion. You are the sky, and nothing ruins the sky. And once you learn to see emotions as weather, Once you stop giving your moods the power to name you, you begin to notice something even quieter. Beneath the shifting sky, beneath the emotional clouds and mental storms, there's stillness. Not silence that demands emptiness, but presence without noise. And in that stillness, something waits for you. Not a better version, not a healed version, just the raw, simple reality of what you are right now. Not to be judged, not to be improved, just seen. But the mind doesn't like this kind of seeing. It wants to comment, label, adjust, fix. And now it's time to step into a new kind of mirror, one that doesn't talk back. That's where we go next. There is a moment in deep awareness when you realize just how much of your suffering doesn't come from what you experience, but from the commentary that follows it. You feel an ache, and the mind whispers, "That shouldn't be there." You notice tiredness, and it says, "You're being lazy." You pause to rest, and it replies, "You're falling behind." The sensation itself is simple. The thoughts around it make it loud. Most people never sit with raw experience. They sit with filtered experience, interpreted, narrated, distorted. The mirror they use is never still. It's cracked by opinions, fogged by expectation. It doesn't reflect, it reacts. And the self that gazes into it becomes confused, exhausted, and distorted in return. But there is another mirror, one that reflects without judgment, one that holds without opinion, one that sees but doesn't explain. This is awareness in its purest form. The kind of presence taught in Buddhist practice, not as a tool to change yourself, but as a way to stop interfering with what already is. Sitting with what is means dropping the need to constantly name every moment. It means looking at the self like a lake looks at the moon, quietly, clearly, without needing to grab or own what it sees. You feel sadness, not to label it, not to fix it, but to notice it like a breeze. You feel joy, not to claim it, not to attach to it, but to watch it pass like light on the wall. This kind of seeing is rare, because we've been taught that awareness must be active, that to pay attention is to analyze, that to look is to judge. But this is not awareness, it's performance. And the result is a life filled with subtle war, always measuring, always trying to be more present, more peaceful, more perfect. Still, awareness stops the war. It watches the mind spin and says nothing. It hears the old inner voice, "You should be better than this," and lets it fade like a radio losing signal. It sees the body hold tension and chooses not to call it failure. It meets the self not with instruction, but with breath, just breath. This isn't about removing thought. It's about no longer being owned by it. A thought arises. You're falling behind. And instead of engaging, you let it pass, like smoke. You don't resist it, but you also don't follow it. You look into the mirror and say nothing. You don't ask for answers. You don't demand meaning. You sit with the discomfort of being seen as you are. And in that seeing, something unexpected happens. You soften, not because you've been convinced you're worthy, but because no one is arguing anymore. The moment doesn't need to be worthy. The self doesn't need to be impressive. The breath doesn't need to be deep. Everything is allowed, everything is met with space. Still, awareness doesn't fix, it doesn't guide, it doesn't offer advice, it just stays, like a mountain beside a storm, like a candle in a silent room. And from this place, clarity begins to rise, not as thought, but as quiet, not as insight, but as relief. You realize how much effort you've been spending trying to shape yourself, and you finally stop. This is the deepest form of rest. Not physical, not emotional, but spiritual. The soul finally drops its act. The face finally drops its smile. The breath finally stops pretending to be composed. You sit, you exist, and you let the moment be unedited. There is nothing to manage here, no story to control, no version of yourself to perform. You are not trying to become more mindful. You are not trying to feel peace. You are not trying to maintain a certain image of awareness. You're just here, with yourself, without decoration. And the truth is, this kind of being is uncomfortable at first, because commentary gives you a sense of control. Labels make you feel safe. Even criticism can feel familiar, like a parent you've never stopped trying to impress. But once you learn to sit without commentary, you start to feel your own presence in a way that's never been filtered. You meet the self that doesn't need improvement, the self that isn't a project, the self that simply is. You begin to look at your flaws and say nothing, not because you've accepted them, but because you're no longer arguing with reality. You're no longer treating imperfection as a problem. You see your tiredness, you see your craving, you see your fear, and you don't add anything, you don't subtract anything, you just stay. And staying changes everything. The body starts to relax, not from effort, but from being seen. The breath deepens, not from practice, but from not being policed. The mind slows, not from discipline, but from being unhooked. And the self, the real self, starts to shine through, quietly, without force, without drama, like light under a door. This is not a destination. It's not something to reach. It's something to remember. The still mirror is already here. You've just been standing in front of a louder one. So, how do you practice this? You sit, you breathe, you watch, and when the commentary arises, as it will, you notice it like a leaf in water. You don't grab it, you don't shame it. You let it float by, and you return to the mirror that doesn't talk back. You look at your face without deciding anything about it. You look at your past without writing a story about what it means. You feel your current moment without comparing it to who you think you should be. And in that space, love grows, not love based on merit, but love based on presence, a kind of warmth that doesn't ask you to change, a kind of attention that doesn't punish you for being human. This is the mirror that heals, not because it fixes you, but because it finally shows you what's always been true. You were never the noise. You were the one watching. And once you finally sit in front of the mirror that doesn't talk back, once you begin to see yourself without adjusting, without fixing, without judging, what's left is something surprisingly difficult to face. Nothing to do, no one to become. And for a mind raised on goals, raised on proving, raised on personal development as survival, that emptiness doesn't feel like peace at first. It feels like loss, because, for so long, the idea of becoming someone better has been the reason to keep going. But Buddhism offers a deeper permission, one the world rarely gives: the permission to stop. Not stop growing, but stop chasing. To rest, not just from effort, but from becoming itself. That's where we go next. In Buddhist thought, there is a specific word for the desire to become: bhava-tanha. It is one of the 3 root cravings that fuel suffering, and unlike the craving for pleasure or the craving to avoid pain, bhava-tanha hides in plain sight. Because it doesn't look like suffering, it looks like ambition, it looks like healing, it looks like self-improvement. But underneath it all is a quiet belief: who I am is not enough. Not yet. And peace must be earned later, when I finally become the person I'm supposed to be. This belief turns life into a treadmill. Every insight, every effort, every transformation becomes just another step toward a moving finish line. You meditate not to be present, but to become someone more mindful. You rest not to nourish, but to become someone more productive tomorrow. Even healing gets co-opted. You don't grieve to release, you grieve to become someone stronger. Everything gets pulled into the future self project. And the now, the only moment that exists, is missed again. But what if you could step off the treadmill? Not because you've arrived, but because there's nowhere to arrive to, because the whole idea that you need to become someone else is the root of your tension, because the part of you that's always striving is the same part that never feels whole. Dropping the future self project doesn't mean giving up. It means waking up. It means seeing that every time you postpone peace for a later version of yourself, you teach your nervous system that now is never enough. And the longer you delay peace, the more it becomes a fantasy, a story, something just beyond the next goal, the next retreat, the next milestone. This is not a rejection of growth. It's a return to presence. You can still learn, still evolve, still change, but without the desperation, without the subtle violence of not yet. You stop trying to sculpt yourself into someone acceptable, and you start sitting with the you that's already here. Because the obsession with becoming is a trap that never ends. Today, you want to be calmer. Tomorrow, you want to be more disciplined, then wiser, then more loving, then more whole. But underneath all of it is the same belief: I can't rest yet. I haven't earned it. But peace is not earned. Peace is remembered. Bhava-tanha says you need to keep going until you deserve to relax. But the Dharma says your worth is already untouched, that the one watching all your becoming has never needed anything added, that the awareness behind your effort is already whole. This shift, dropping the craving to become, changes everything. You wake up in the morning and stop asking, "How can I improve today?" Instead, you ask, "Can I meet myself where I am?" You stop measuring each moment by its utility. You let breath be breath. You let sadness be sadness. You let joy rise and fall without turning it into a sign of progress. The idea of your ideal self fades. Not because you've given up on your values, but because you've stopped using the future as a weapon against the present. You stop fantasizing about a version of you who never doubts, never fears, never forgets. And in that absence of fantasy, you find something real. You find yourself, not the improved version. not the wiser version, just the one who's been carrying all the striving, the one beneath the effort, the one who's always been here. And that self doesn't need fixing. It needs rest, not the kind of rest that waits until the weekend or the vacation, but the kind that says, you are allowed to stop now. The kind of rest that doesn't demand justification, that doesn't measure your productivity, that doesn't ask what comes next. This is radical in a world that praises forward motion, that defines you by your goals, that says the best version of you is always later. But the Dharma is not interested in praise. It's interested in freedom. And real freedom begins when you no longer need your future to validate your now. When you drop the craving to become, even spiritual practice becomes lighter. You meditate not to transform, but to sit. You walk not to achieve mindfulness, but to feel your feet. You breathe not to get somewhere, but because breath is here. This is the heart of non-striving, not giving up on peace, but allowing it to arise naturally when you stop chasing it. And when it does, it's not the peace of achievement. It's the peace of presence. The peace that says, nothing more is required, not in this breath, not in this body, not in this life. And maybe that's the hardest thing to accept. That you don't need to become someone else to be free. That the very chase is what keeps the door locked. That surrender is not a last resort. It's the way through. You can still make choices, still follow your values, still show up with care. But you do it from rest, not restlessness. You do it from fullness, not hunger. You do it from the quiet, knowing that who you are is not a mistake waiting to be corrected. It's a presence waiting to be met. And if the mind tries to argue, tries to remind you of your unfinishedness, your flaws, your goals, you breathe. You say, thank you for trying to help. And then you return to the space that doesn't need to change. Because even if nothing improves, even if no one understands, even if your journey ends quietly, you were enough. Right now, right here. And once you finally drop the project of becoming, once you stop using your future self as a condition for rest, there's a silence that starts to settle inside. But even in that silence, one habit still lingers. A voice that speaks not from craving, but from correction. A voice that doesn't ask you to change because you're not enough, but because you should know better. The critic, the monitor, the part of the mind that believes wisdom only counts if it cuts. And now it's time to change how that blade is held, because clarity doesn't have to come with cruelty. Correction doesn't have to feel like punishment. Wisdom can be sharp, but it can also be soft. That's where we go next. Discipline and clarity are essential, but how you wield them determines whether they become tools of growth or weapons of harm. Most people confuse discernment with self-judgment. They believe that to be wise is to be hard on yourself. To correct is to condemn. To notice error is to shame the part of you that wandered. But Buddhist teaching shows another way, a way where awareness slices through confusion, not with anger, but with precision and care, a way where the sword of wisdom is wrapped in silk. This soft sword begins with the understanding that inner correction does not need to be violent to be effective. You can tell the truth without tearing yourself down. You can point out a habit without identifying with it. You can shift direction without calling yourself a failure. The mind often believes that if it doesn't criticize, you'll never grow. That if it doesn't scold, you'll make the same mistake again. But this belief comes from fear, not clarity. Harshness doesn't create awareness, it creates tension. And tension clouds perception. When you attack yourself, you contract. Your body tightens, your heart defends, and the lesson gets buried under shame. But when you speak to yourself with gentleness, the mind stays open. The nervous system remains stable, and the truth, however sharp, can be received. You become able to see clearly without shutting down, to respond without collapsing. Soft discernment sounds like this. I acted from fear today, not what's wrong with me. It sounds like this reaction came from old pain, not I'll never be better. It sounds like I can choose differently next time, not I always ruin things. The language shifts, and with it, the energy inside you shifts too. This does not mean you let everything slide. Softness is not passivity, it's precision. The soft sword cuts only what needs to be cut. It doesn't slash wildly through the soul. It doesn't punish for imperfection. It removes confusion. It trims delusion. It separates habit from identity. And it does all of this without breaking the spirit that holds it. In practice, this looks like pausing before reaction. Not to suppress emotion, but to meet it with curiosity. It means noticing a destructive thought and saying, "Ah, that old pattern." Not believing it, not indulging it, but also not attacking yourself for having it. It means giving your pain a name without giving it control. You do not become stronger by being harder. You become stronger by being clearer. And clarity is kind. Not soft in the way that avoids truth, but soft in the way that truth can be received without damage. The Buddha used the word prajna for wisdom, a sharp, penetrating insight. But it was always balanced by karuna, compassion. Wisdom sees, compassion holds. Together, they become the soft sword, discernment that does not destroy. Without this balance, your practice turns brittle. You catch your faults, but never feel free. You see your patterns, but never feel whole. You walk the path, but never feel worthy. Because every step is followed by a critic instead of a companion. But when you carry the soft sword, you become your own companion. You don't hide from the truth, but you don't use it to hurt yourself either. You guide yourself like someone who matters. You correct gently. You realign without rage. This changes how you meet failure. Instead of collapsing into blame, you lean into understanding. Instead of reliving mistakes, you study them without shame. Instead of rehearsing your worst moments, you harvest their wisdom and move forward clean. And it changes how you meet others. Because the way you treat yourself is the way you end up treating the world. If you punish your own mind for wandering, you'll have no patience for others. If you reject your own darkness, you'll judge everyone else's. But when your inner sword is wrapped in silk, you become safe to be around. Not because you never see what's wrong, but because your vision doesn't wound. You begin to teach by example. You show that clarity doesn't require cruelty, that direction doesn't require domination, that discipline can be an act of love, and that presence is most powerful when it's gentle. This is not a technique, it's a shift in identity. You stop seeing yourself as a problem that needs to be fixed. You stop using truth as punishment. You start using truth as healing, like light, not heat, like medicine, not shame. And when you live this way long enough, a new trust is born. You stop fearing your own reflection. You stop hiding from your own patterns, because you know that whatever arises, you will meet it wisely and kindly. So the next time you catch yourself drifting, pause. The next time you feel the sting of regret, pause. The next time you speak to yourself in a tone that tightens your breath, pause. And in that pause, reach for the soft sword. Not to slash, not to silence, just to see, and in that seeing, to free. And once you begin using clarity like a soft sword, once you stop cutting yourself just to be honest, you realize something deeper about the mind's pain, that it doesn't always scream. Sometimes it loops. Sometimes it doesn't hurt like fire, but like friction. It revisits, replays, rewinds. Not because you want to suffer, but because some part of you believes that going over it one more time will solve it, explain it, heal it. But it never does. It just reopens what's trying to close. It just keeps picking at what wants to mend. This is the quiet harm of rumination, and now it's time to stop scratching what could have already healed. That's where we go next. Rumination is one of the mind's most deceptive habits. It feels like thinking, but it's not. It feels like processing, but it's not. It feels like insight is just around the corner, but it never arrives. Instead, it traps you in the same phrases, the same questions, the same images, again and again. It's mental erosion. It's looping attention that eats away at your peace, not because you're doing it wrong, but because the mind is trying to fix a wound by staring at it. Buddhist psychology doesn't just treat this as a quirk. It treats it as a form of suffering. Not passive, but active. Not emotional, but behavioral. Rumination is not just a mood, it's an action. A repeated choice, often unconscious, to stay in contact with pain long after the pain has done its job. Like scratching a mosquito bite until it scars. Like returning to a bruise and pressing on it just to see if it still hurts. The mind ruminates because it believes it's doing something helpful. It wants resolution. It wants closure. It wants to rewind the moment or rehearse a better one. But none of that ever brings relief. Because the truth is, your pain doesn't need more attention. It needs space. And space only comes when you stop feeding the loop. Rumination is exhausting because it pretends to be productive. You think you're analyzing, understanding, learning. But really, you're just reinforcing. Every time you replay the fight, the loss, the mistake, the regret, you deepen the groove. You etch the pain into your memory like carving into stone. And the wound never closes because it's never left alone. Mindfulness is the first hand that gently moves yours away. Not with force, not with denial, but with presence. It says, "You've touched this enough." It says, "The lesson has already been seen." It says, "You don't need to bleed again just to remember you were cut." When you ruminate, your nervous system doesn't know it's just thought. It responds like it's real. The heart races, the breath shortens, the muscles brace. You live the same event twice, 10 times, 1,000 times. The pain becomes more about the revisiting than the event itself. And soon, you're no longer healing, you're hurting. Mindfulness interrupts this, not by solving the content, but by shifting the relationship. It helps you see the moment the loop begins. It shows you what it feels like to enter the spiral, the subtle tightness in your chest, the narrowing of vision, the phrase that starts it all. I should have. Why did they? What if? That's the moment, the entry point. And that's where you pause. You say, this is ruminating. You name it, not as an identity, but as an action. You don't judge it. You don't shame yourself for returning, but you stop pretending it's in sight. You stop lying to yourself that this time will be different. You step back and you breathe. You redirect attention, not by distraction, but by anchoring. You come back to sensation, the breath, the feet, the sound in the room, the feel of your own hands, anything real, anything current. You don't fight the thoughts, you just stop feeding them. And when they return, which they will, you repeat, gently, patiently, without anger. Because rumination is not an enemy, it's a habit, a learned response to discomfort, a mind that was never taught how to let things be unresolved. But now you can teach it. You can say, we don't need to go there again. You can say, we've been down that road. You can say, peace doesn't live in that memory. And slowly, the loop loses power. The urge fades. The scab begins to dry. And this doesn't mean forgetting. It means no longer reliving. It means honoring the wound by letting it rest. Because healing isn't about replaying pain until it disappears. Healing is about releasing the part of you that believes pain is who you are. The mind may protest. It may tell you that if you stop thinking about it, you'll forget something important. But you won't. You'll remember the truth more clearly when it's not wrapped in obsession. You'll remember the lesson without reliving the suffering. You'll remember the story without being trapped in the role. You are allowed to stop revisiting what broke you. Not because it didn't matter, but because it has nothing left to teach. Stopping the loop doesn't mean forcing yourself to feel good. It means refusing to dig the wound open again. It means resting in what's actually here. The breath, the light, the sound, the moment, the life that's still unfolding. And sometimes the loop returns because you're tired, vulnerable, uncertain. That's okay. You meet it without anger. You guide yourself back without panic. You say, I see you, but we're not going there today. And you return again and again until the return becomes natural. Over time, something shifts. The mind gets quieter, not because you shut it down, but because it trusts you now. It knows you won't keep it in a cycle of endless revisiting. It knows you'll notice, name, and step back. That's what stops the picking. That's what allows the skin to seal. That's what brings peace. Not by rewriting the story, but by leaving it on the shelf and stepping outside, into the air, into the now, into the part of your life that isn't stuck in a loop, but still waiting to be lived. And once you stop the loop, once you gently remove your hand from the scab and stop reopening the pain just to feel like you're doing something, you're left with something quieter, but no less real. The ache is still there, not sharp, not loud, but present, not demanding attention, but not ready to vanish either. And this is the moment where most people turn away again, try to distract, try to move on. But what if, instead of turning away, you turn toward it, with kindness, not to analyze, but to speak, not to interrogate, but to listen. What if you treated your suffering not as a threat, but as a frightened part of you waiting to be met with compassion? That's where we go next. There's a practice that grows out of Buddhist mindfulness and is echoed in many traditions of contemplative healing. It's simple. You visualize a chair across from you. You place your suffering there, not the whole story, just the emotion, the fear, the sorrow, the shame, the part of you that aches, and you talk to it. Not like an enemy, not like a problem, but like a child who doesn't know how to ask for help. This sounds strange at first, but it's not imaginary. It's intimacy, the kind that most people never give themselves, because instead of turning toward pain with presence, they avoid it or attack it. They either suppress it until it leaks out in strange ways, or obsess over it until they're drowned in it. But pain doesn't heal through avoidance or obsession. It heals through relationship. The empty chair is a doorway to relationship. You sit quietly. You breathe. You sense the emotional knot inside you. You ask it to take a seat, not to be fixed, but to be heard. And then you speak, gently, slowly, like someone who is trying to understand. You say things you've never said to your pain before. Things like, "I see you," or "I'm here now," or "You don't have to protect me anymore." This kind of speaking isn't performance. It's not about saying the right words. It's about offering what your suffering never got: a listening presence, a kind witness, a voice that doesn't flinch. You might ask your pain where it came from. You might ask it what it's afraid of. You might ask it what it needs. Not because you expect a clear answer, but because the act of asking builds trust. It signals that you're no longer trying to erase it. You're willing to be with it. And sometimes the pain answers, not in words, but in sensation, tightness, tears, memory. Sometimes all it needs is to be seen, to be welcomed, to be released from the prison of suppression. This is not about indulging suffering. It's about holding it in the right light, like a teacher holds a scared child, with strength, with patience, with enough stillness to let fear dissolve on its own. The chair is not magical. It's a symbol, a space where you stop treating pain like an invader and start treating it like a visitor, a lost part of yourself that's been crying in the dark. And when you speak to it with compassion, something shifts. The pain softens, the body relaxes. The loop you've been caught in for years begins to loosen, not through force, but through kindness. This practice also reveals how often we speak to ourselves with cruelty. When you hear the voice you use on your own pain, it becomes clear why healing has been so hard. You wouldn't speak to a child that way, you wouldn't speak to a friend that way. But to your own fear, to your own grief, you've been harsh, demanding, impatient. The empty chair shows you what another tone feels like. A tone that says, "I know you've been trying to help me survive." A tone that says, "You carried a burden I didn't know how to name." A tone that says, "You don't have to hold it alone anymore." And you begin to realize that the part of you in that chair is not the enemy. It's the part that learned to brace, to protect, to tighten around the wound because no one else knew how to hold it. And now, with you here, that part doesn't need to be alone. You don't need to fix it. You only need to speak to it, sit with it, listen to it. And slowly, the emotion begins to integrate, not as identity, but as history. It stops being something that defines you. It becomes something that shaped you and then passed. This changes your relationship with every part of your past. You stop needing to justify it. You stop needing to rewrite it. You stop needing to turn it into a lesson. You simply hold it as is, with presence. And when the pain rises again, which it may, you don't panic. You bring out the chair again. You say, "Welcome back, let's talk." And just like that, the habit of fear becomes the practice of care. This is not easy work. It's tender, it's slow, it's sacred, but it's also incredibly powerful. Because once you know how to speak to your pain, you stop being afraid of it. Once you know how to meet your fear, you stop running from it. Once you know how to listen to your sadness, you stop drowning in it. You become a safe place for yourself, and that changes everything. So try it, not once, but gently, again and again. When you feel lost, when you feel overwhelmed, when you feel like you're about to spiral, sit down, place the chair, let your pain sit across from you, and speak. Because healing doesn't always begin with silence. Sometimes it begins with a sentence. One sentence of kindness you never knew you were allowed to say. And once you've sat across from your own pain, once you've spoken to it gently, witnessed it without flinching, and given it the attention it never had, you begin to notice something unexpected. Not the kind of breakthrough the mind was hoping for. Not a sudden clarity or final answer, but something softer, a returning, a kind of quiet that doesn't come from solving the wound, but from being willing to hold it without conditions. And that's when it becomes clear. Peace doesn't begin with change. It begins with remembering. Not who you could become, but who you already were, before the world started teaching you how to forget. That's where we go next. There's an idea that runs through modern spiritual life like an invisible wire, that peace is something to work toward, that enlightenment is a finish line, that healing is a ladder with rungs to climb. Even the language we use gives it away. Higher self, spiritual goals, awakening stages. It all suggests distance, separation, a destination you must reach. But Buddhism offers something different, not a goal, but a return. Enlightenment is not a badge. It's not a reward for passing life's hardest tests. It's not a certificate handed out after years of discipline. It's not something you unlock by perfecting your thoughts or mastering every emotion. It's simply this: the moment you stop running from yourself, the moment you stop believing that peace lives anywhere but here, that who you are now, beneath the layers, is already enough. The path is not about adding, it's about shedding, not becoming something greater, but remembering something quieter. You were born with peace, not the peace of silence, but the peace of presence, before the roles, before the stories, before you were told what success looks like, what failure means, what you should fear, what you should chase. All of that was placed on top. None of it came from within. And so the real journey is a return, not to childhood, not to ignorance, but to essence, to the part of you that existed before identity hardened, before every experience was measured against expectation, before the world convinced you that you were something to fix. You don't have to achieve peace. You just have to stop abandoning yourself. Every time you force yourself to fit in, every time you judge a feeling for staying too long, every time you pretend to be okay when you're not, That's the abandonment. And peace waits right outside that door. This doesn't mean life stops asking things of you. You still grow. You still navigate pain, loss, change. But you do it differently. You stop thinking of life as a series of tests. You stop treating every hardship as something to transcend. You stop chasing progress and start noticing presence. The most spiritual person in the room is not the one who looks enlightened. It's the one who no longer thinks they need to be. The one who doesn't care how they appear, who no longer seeks approval from the invisible scoreboard of spiritual success. That's peace, not something you perform, but something you rest into. And the irony is, the more you let go of achievement, the deeper the transformation. Not because you're trying harder, but because you're no longer resisting what is. You begin to move from the inside out, not according to steps or systems, but according to truth, raw truth, the kind you feel in the bones, the kind that doesn't need explanation. Peace is not a thing. It's not a possession. It's not a mood. It's the recognition of home, not a place, but a space inside. A space where you no longer pretend, where you stop negotiating with your own heart, where you breathe without performance, where you sit without needing to become anyone else. So much of the suffering in practice comes from waiting to arrive. You keep thinking, once I'm more grounded, I'll relax. Once I'm fully healed, I'll finally rest. Once I feel totally worthy, I'll stop proving myself. But the truth is, none of those moments will ever come if you keep tying them to the future. You don't find peace through achievement. You find it through surrender. Surrender doesn't mean giving up. It means giving in to the now, to the breath, to the version of you who's already here, the one who doesn't need to be fixed to be whole, the one who doesn't need more time to be real, the one who only asks that you stay. That's the quiet message at the heart of all deep practice. Stay, not in perfection, not in mastery, just in presence. Stay with yourself when the mind says you're not enough. Stay with your breath when it wants to run. Stay with your heart when it aches without a reason. Stay long enough to hear what the silence is really saying, and what it says is this: you were never far. You just got caught in the idea that peace lives somewhere else. So you don't need to climb any higher. You don't need to unlock any secrets. You don't need to be more enlightened than you were yesterday. You just need to come home. Come home to the version of you that doesn't need defending. Come home to the quiet awareness that doesn't speak in comparison. Come home to the presence that never left, even when you did. Come home, not because it's an accomplishment, but because it's your nature. Like gravity, like stillness, like the breath you don't control but continues anyway. And when you do, when you really let yourself return, you'll notice something. You don't feel proud, you don't feel victorious, you just feel okay. Okay in a way that doesn't depend on anything. Okay in a way that doesn't need applause. Okay in a way that says, I am already enough. And that is the deepest peace of all. And once you remember that peace is not something you achieve, but something you come home to, you begin to see all the places where you've been taught to earn what you already are. You start to notice how much of your inner life has been built like a performance, and beneath the performance, there's often something colder. A courtroom, a place in the mind where you're always on trial. One moment the judge, the next the accused, constantly switching roles, always arguing, always justifying. And what's most exhausting of all is that the verdict never arrives, because peace doesn't come from winning the trial, it comes from leaving the courtroom altogether. That's where we go next. The human mind is endlessly skilled at turning experience into judgment. Every feeling is cross-examined. Every mistake is brought into evidence. Even rest becomes something to defend. There's a voice in the background, sometimes loud, sometimes subtle, asking, "Did I do enough? Was that the right choice? Why did I feel that? What will they think of me?" And behind every question is the same stage, an inner courtroom where you're both the prosecutor and the defendant. This inner theater is rarely noticed directly. It doesn't feel like performance. It feels like being responsible, like trying to improve. But underneath that language is a constant sense of unease. You're never fully innocent. You're always trying to prove that you're not as flawed, lazy, selfish, emotional, or weak as some part of you suspects you might be. And the cost of this trial is your peace. In Buddhist teachings, this pattern is closely tied to attachment, to identity, to being right, to controlling how you're seen. And it thrives in a mind without equanimity. Equanimity, or upekkha, is not indifference. It's not apathy. It's the quiet capacity to observe without clinging, to see clearly without turning every moment into a moral conclusion, to let life move without making it about your worth. In the inner courtroom, equanimity is the exit door. Because the real issue isn't whether you're guilty or innocent. The issue is that you're caught in the loop of always needing to decide, and each time you do, the trial resets. You judge yourself for being too harsh, then judge yourself for not holding enough standards, then question whether you're avoiding accountability, then feel shame for overthinking. Round and round it goes. To step out, you begin by noticing the courtroom itself. You pause and name the setting. You realize that you're not just feeling bad, you're on trial. You're rehashing moments, assigning motives, defending behavior, imagining how others see you. And once you see the structure, you stop trying to win. You stop arguing. You stop preparing a defense. And this is the shift from judgment to witnessing. You stop making every emotion a case file. You let thoughts be thoughts, not evidence. You stop dragging yourself to the stand every time you feel vulnerable, messy, tired, or human. You realize that no one is asking for this trial except a part of your mind that's forgotten how to relax. Non-attachment begins with the recognition that thoughts are not laws. Feelings are not confessions. The past is not a crime scene. And the self does not need to be cleared of wrongdoing in order to be whole. There's deep fear in letting go of this process because it's become your way of staying in control. But the truth is, there is no peace inside the courtroom. Even when you win the argument, the judge is still watching. The silence is never safe. There's always another mistake waiting to be reviewed, another moment to dissect, another feeling to cross-examine. You may try to silence the judge with affirmations, or soften the prosecution with explanations. But these are just new roles in the same play. The only true freedom is to walk out entirely, to no longer identify with either role, to say, I am not the one who must prove. I am not the one who must decide. This is where equanimity becomes your path. You begin to treat your internal reactions as weather, not judgments, not truths, just experiences passing through. You don't deny discomfort, but you don't put it on trial either. You don't shame yourself for slipping. You don't perform virtue to earn rest. You just sit with what's here, letting it be ungraded, letting it breathe. And in that stillness, something returns, a kind of peace that doesn't come from being right, a kind of calm that doesn't depend on fixing what happened. You start to feel the softness underneath the noise, the part of you that was never trying to win, just trying to be. This is not about becoming passive, it's about becoming whole, because when you're no longer at war with yourself, you act from clarity, not guilt, from compassion, not fear. You still take responsibility, but not as a sentence, as a choice. You begin to guide yourself not with force, but with care. You reflect without weaponizing memory. You apologize without shame. You grow without turning every misstep into a trial. And most importantly, you rest. You stop looking over your shoulder, waiting for the next internal verdict. You stop bracing every time you make a choice. You start moving through life without dragging your own record behind you, because the record was never the truth. It was the courtroom script, and now you don't need the script anymore. So the next time you feel that courtroom rising, pause. Notice the setting. Step off the stand. Put down the gavel. Let go of both the defense and the prosecution and walk out into the air, into the breath, into the moment that asks nothing of you but presence. This is how the trial ends, not with a declaration, but with your absence. You've just walked through the quiet corridors of the mind, through the stories that hurt, the silence that heals, the masks you no longer need, and the truths that were never far. You didn't chase peace tonight. You returned to it. No fixing, no performing, no more future self-project to exhaust you. Just a breath, just presence, just the quiet remembering that you were never broken, only buried beneath layers the world taught you to wear. Each lesson was a step out of the courtroom, out of the storm, out of the false mirror. You let the mud settle. You dropped the sword. You stopped picking the wound. You listened to your pain like a teacher. You stopped becoming and started being. That's not a small thing. That's a homecoming. So as you drift into sleep, let the teachings stay with you, not as ideas, but as anchors. Let them melt into the background of your breath, your body, your being. There's nothing left to prove, nothing to earn, nothing to correct. You're here, you're whole, you're home. If these teachings brought you any comfort, clarity, or stillness tonight, leave a comment below and share what spoke to your heart. Your voice matters here. And if you want more videos like this, filled with deep insight and gentle guidance, don't forget to subscribe and tap the bell. Peace isn't a one-time arrival, it's a rhythm. Let's return to it together. Good night, and may your stillness echo into tomorrow.